There are 11 of us in the line and I am ninth, which is the best number I get all day. The stamping machine sits at the foot of ladder 9 with its armhole open like a mouth, and it has smelled the same my whole life, hot dust with something sweet underneath. Ve Marchetti goes ahead of me and comes away pulling his sleeve down over a fresh rigger, and the line makes the noise a line makes when somebody gets a good one. Then it is my arm in the hole. The cuff closes, cold spot, hot spot, and the machine says no avert, and then it says my class out loud, because it says everything out loud, because 30 years ago somebody decided a man should hear his life from a speaker at chest height. Farmer. Loud enough for the back of the line. Nobody laughs yet. We are polite on the 9th floor for almost 1 whole second, and then Ve makes a noise through his nose, and after that everybody else is free to do it too. The machine hums. It is looking for my kit because every class gets a kit. Riggers get gloves and a line gun. Sorters get the wand. I stand there with my sleeve up and my arm going numb and listen to it hunt through a drawer nobody has opened since before my grandmother was buried, and I count the seconds, because counting is what I do when I would rather be somewhere else. 22 seconds. Then it gives me a hoe, wooden handle, iron head, a tool for a thing this city does not do, handed over at chest height in front of 11 people who all have somewhere to be and have decided not to go there yet. I take it. What am I going to do? Leave it there. The verdict comes down the line while I am still pulling my sleeve back over the mark. Sorter is a job. Rigger is a job. Farmer is a word out of a song nobody has sung in 90 years, and there is nothing in this building for it to point at, and not one person saying so is wrong. You need one fact about this place, and then I will stop explaining and go and stand in some water. Nobody in Meridian has ever eaten anything that grew. Not me, not my grandmother, not her grandmother. There is paste out of the vats on level 64, gray and warm, and 2 chits a day of it against a wage of 4, and that is the menu, all of it. And it has been that since before anybody alive can argue about. So I carry a hoe home past 4 floors of people who have already heard, and 3 of them say something kind to me as I go, which is worse. Barch Osk comes down at the end of shift for the week's tithe on 7 to 11, and he wipes his palms on the rag over his shoulder before he touches anything, the way he does with a door handle and with a child's cup. He carries the water for these floors. That is a real job, and he is not shy about it. I have no cans. I have a hoe and a tin. He turns the tin over twice and shakes it beside his ear, and the sound is 6 paper packets moving against metal, and he knows exactly what it is, because he has stood in this room before, and my grandmother was alive then. Seeds, he says, and he says it to the room instead of to me. Well, somebody has finally found a use for seeds. He goes up the ladder with it. 9 people on the landing watch him go, and not one of them looks at me, which is its own kind of decency, and the tin was Tamsin's, and it goes up the ladder. 2 floors above, Barch stops under the light and opens the tin. He tips 6 paper packets into his palm and reads the writing on each one, and the writing is a dead woman's handwriting and means nothing to him. He puts 5 back. He holds the 6th up to the light for a while, then puts it in his shirt pocket and buttons the pocket, and he wipes his hands on the rag before he starts walking again. So I go down. Down is where a farmer goes, apparently, and I would rather be anywhere at all than on the 9th floor tonight, and those 2 facts arrive together and agree with each other. Below floor 1, the stair keeps going and the water starts. It is black and warm, and it does not move, and it takes the light off my lamp and gives back nothing. I stand on the 3rd step from the bottom with a farm tool in my hand, and I count again, and this time I get to 4 before I put my foot in. It is up over my knees. Under it the floor is soft, not rotten soft. Soft like something you could put your hand into and get your hand back. I put the hoe in and turn it over. 30 years of everything this city dropped comes up off the bottom, black and stinking and full of small living argument, and I stand there in the dark holding an iron head on a stick in a flooded corridor, and here is the stupid thing. It smells better than the 9th floor. I go 60 feet in because the smell gets stronger, and my lamp is on my shoulder, and the water goes from my knees to my thighs and back to my knees, and then the hoe hits something that is not floor and not silt and rings. Stone. A set rectangle of it, poured and finished, about the size of 2 beds, with a foot of mud lying on top of it like a lid that took 30 years to arrive. There is a plate bolted to the near edge. The plate is rusted to lace, but the letters were punched into it with a tool by somebody who leaned on the work, and punched letters outlive everything. Hessel, that is the whole of it. One name, no dates, nothing after it, and whoever set that plate down here meant it to be read by somebody who had not been born yet. I work the mud cap off with my hands because the hoe is too wide and too stupid for it, and it takes 11 minutes, and near the end I break a fingernail back to the quick and say something my grandmother would have hit me for. Nothing about this is magic. My hands did it. Under the cap, in the cold water that has been standing on it since before I was born, there is a mass of something with roots on it. Red, fist-sized, 4 of them on one crown, with a skin that comes off under my thumb like a bad idea. Whatever this is, it finished growing 30 years ago and never got eaten, and the water and the stone kept it exactly where it stopped. Behind me, somebody in the dark says that if I am going to stand there with my mouth open, I could at least stand to one side, because she is on a route. Sona Reyes, 26. Courier, Route 41, waiting up the middle of my corridor with her boots slung round her neck and a strap of chits across her chest like a soldier out of a picture. Couriers cut the waterline when the ladders jam at shift change, and she has done it for years, so she is not afraid of the water and she is not afraid of me. She looks at my hands. I have not said anything yet, and she reaches over and takes one off the crown, because a courier's whole living is lifting a thing out of one hand and moving it somewhere, and she gets her thumb through the skin, and she bites it. Then she stops walking. Her jaw works twice and stops. Her eyes go wide, and then they go wet, and it is not crying. It is water coming out of her because her face does not know what else to do with what is happening in her mouth. She puts her free hand flat on the wall. It is sweet, she says. Not sweet like the machine smell. Sweet like it wants something back from me. There is water inside it. It is doing something at the back of my jaw, and I want you to make it stop, and also do not touch me until I have finished it. She finishes it. She stands in black water up over her thighs in a dead corridor under the whole weight of 90 levels, and eats a red thing off a dead man's stone, and then she looks at the 3 left on the crown like somebody on my floor looking at a full cartridge. What is it called? She says, and I give her the truth, which is that I have no idea. I am 18 years old, and I have eaten nothing but paste for all of it, and neither has she, and neither has one single person either of us has ever met. She says a word about that. It is not a word I am going to repeat, and she says it slowly, and then she says it again, with my name on the end of it. I take 3 of them up to the 9th floor because Lipa is 12 and because Wen has not kept anything down in a week, and it is the worst decision of my first day, and I make it in about 4 seconds. Lipa opens the door with the cracked cup in her hand because she is never anywhere without it, and the smell goes past her into the room before I do. It gets out. Nobody warned me, because nobody in this building has ever had to know it. Smell is not like a lamp. You cannot put your coat over it. It goes into the room, then it finds the vent, and the vent on my floor is the vent on 10. I hear a door, then 2 more, then a man down the corridor asking at volume what is cooking, which is a strange thing to shout in a building where nothing has ever been cooked, and he is shouting it because he does not have a better word for it. Wen comes off the mattress with her hand on the doorframe and her breathing doing the thing it does, and she looks at the 3 red things on the table for about 2 seconds, and then she shuts the door. Shut it out, she says. I cannot afford to want anything. She says it the way you say a price, and then she sits on the edge of the mattress and puts her hands over her ears as though the smell were getting in through them. Lipa does not shut anything. Lipa comes round the table and puts her nose an inch from them and stands there breathing, and then she says the sentence, in the voice of somebody doing arithmetic she has done before. If they find out, they will take it, she says, and they will not even be wrong to. That is what I would do. She is 12. She has counted her mother's filter cartridges as other people count days since she was 8 years old, and nobody has ever given her a reason to expect anything else, and she says it with no heat in it at all. Out in the corridor, a woman is telling somebody that it is coming up from below, and a man is telling her that it cannot be, because nothing comes up from below. That is the one thing below is for. We eat them with the door shut and a wet rag pushed into the gap. Wen takes 2 bites and puts her face down, and I go and look at the wall for a minute so she can do that on her own. Lipa eats hers in 7 pieces and puts the skin in her pocket. Then I go back down, because there are 3 floors above me hunting for a smell, and the only place in Meridian where nobody is looking is the place nobody has looked since before I was born. Sona is still there. She has missed her window on the ladders, and she tells me she is charging me for it, and then she does not name a price, which I notice and do not mention. I go back to the stone and dig where the crown was, and about a foot under it my fingers close on a fishbone, a whole spine of one, longer than my hand, off a fish out of a river that stopped being a river before this city had a name. I sit back on my heels in the water and look at it a while. The roots were not near the bone. They were on it, round it, into it. And this stone is a lid, and the water is a lid, and everything the arcology has dropped down a chute for 30 years is lying under the lid going soft. Whatever is under the row remembers, I say out loud to her face, because she is standing right there, and because a thing said to a person is harder to be wrong about afterwards. Sona says that is either the most useful sentence anybody has ever said to her, or the most useless, and she cannot tell which yet, and she would rather be shown than told, which is fair. It is also why the next thing happens tonight instead of never. There is a patrol drone on the silt shelf 20 feet down the corridor. It has been there long enough to be part of the shelf. Half its skin is gone, its arms are folded up wrong, and the cell in its belly is the size of a loaf and as dead as the floor. It takes both of us to drag it, and it weighs what a person weighs. Sona gets her shoulder under one arm of it and tells me all the way down the corridor that this is not what couriers do. I tell her I do not know what farmers do either. We get it into the soft ground beside the stone, and I put it under with the hoe and with my hands, and then I stand on top of it to press it down. Then I say the number out loud, because a number you say in front of somebody is a number you have to come back for. 9 days. She wants to know how I know it is 9. I do not know that it is. My grandmother knew it, and told me in a kitchen when I was 11 and could not have cared less, and the whole of what I have off her is one sentence about dirt and a tin that is upstairs in a man's pocket. Sona pulls her boots back on with one hand flat on the wall, and she stands in the corridor with the lamp under her chin working out a route in her head, and I can watch her doing it. 9 days, she says. I will be on the stair at the top of shift change. She is halfway up before she stops and asks the second question, and it is the one I have not thought about at all. What happens if I bring somebody? I stand in the water with a broken fingernail and a farm tool, and above me the 9th floor is out in the corridor sniffing at the vents, and in 6 days a man with a rag over his shoulder comes down for the tithe, and for the first time in my life I own something worth taking. By the second morning there are 2 men from floor 10 standing under the riser grating on our landing, taking turns to put their faces up against it and breathe in, and one of them has brought a lamp for it. The one with the lamp is Paul, who sorts cable and has an opinion about everything, and he tells the landing that it is a fault in the vat feed, that the pipes on 64 have gone over and we are getting the smell of it 400 feet down. Marta from 10 says that if the vat feed had gone over, we would all be dead by now, and Paul says that is exactly his point, and neither of them notices me going past with wet boots and a hoe over my shoulder. That is day 1 of 6. I have a hole under the floor of the world with food in it, and a smell that walks up the risers on its own, and no way at all of stopping it, and 3 floors between me and a man who takes things for a living. Sona finds me on the stair at the end of the 2nd day, sitting above the waterline with my head in my hands, and she does not commiserate. She names a thing she has, and I do not. She knows which vent serves which floor, not roughly, and not off a plan she once saw. Exactly. A courier who cannot read a building spends her life going up the wrong stair core. she says, and she has Route 41 in her head the way I have my own hands. The risers on 7 to 11 all draw off one plenum, she says, and the plenum has a damper at the low end, and the damper is a plate on a wheel. Turn that plate over and those 4 floors take their air off the other core, and your smell goes into an empty shaft. I ask her what it costs. It is not a favor, she says, and she says it flat, the way you say the weight of a package. Her price is that she gets told things first, before Lipa, before whoever comes next, before anybody. She is not asking for a share. First. I say yes before she has finished the sentence, and she hears me do it. She looks at me a second longer than she needs to, and then she goes and turns the damper, and neither of us mentions the second again, and I am going to be paying for it for a long while. 2 days later, the landing on 10 smells of nothing at all. Pol tells everybody he was right about the vat feed and that they have clearly fixed it upstairs, and he is so pleased with himself that Marta stops arguing out of pity. Day 6 is tithe day. Barch comes down at the end of shift with the rag over his shoulder and the can list in his head, and I have been on my feet 19 hours, and there is a red thing sitting on my table because I was too tired to move it. I see it when he is already through the door, so there is nothing to be done. I stand between the table and the wall like a man being helpful, and I count in my head, which is the only reason I do not say something stupid out loud. He takes the rag off his shoulder, dries both hands on it, and picks it up. He turns it over twice. He puts it to his nose and breathes in, and his face does what a face does when it gets an instruction it has no drawer for, and then he turns it a third time, looking for the side of it that has a price. "What is it?" he says. I tell him it came off the stair, which is true, and he asks what it is for, and I say I do not know, which is also true, and those 2 sentences are the most honest things I say all week. He puts it back down on the table. It is not cans, and it is not a cartridge, and nobody up the ladder has ever asked him for one, so there is no number attached to it anywhere in his head, and a thing with no number is not worth the climb. Then he takes my lamp, which cost 9 chits, and which I need in order to see the floor of a flooded corridor, and he wipes his palms before he lifts it, and he tells me a man with no cans has to give something. He goes, and the door closes. Lipa has been sitting on the crate by the door through all of it with her cup in her lap, and she waits about 4 seconds. "He is stupid, Noah," she says. "He is properly stupid. He had it in his hand." Wen tells her to be quiet, in the voice you use when the thing said out loud is true and the wall is thin. Lipa goes quiet. Both of them are right, and I am standing in my own room in the dark, because the lamp is going up a ladder. The next morning on floor 14, Barch sells packet 1 to a sorter named Coyle for 11 chits. He calls it a collector's item and lets Coyle turn it over in the light before he names the number. Coyle asks what it is for. Barch says he has no idea, and that is exactly what makes it worth having, and Coyle counts the chits out and buttons the packet into his coat with 2 fingers, and neither of them laughs. Lipa robs me the same evening, and I do not catch her at it for 3 weeks. She goes down the stair behind me while I am moving crates, and comes back up with a seedling out of the second row, and the wet silt from around it packed into the cracked cup. She carries it home in front of her with both hands, like a woman bringing soup to somebody ill. 2 days later, it is gray at the edges and going over, because silt dies when it dries, and the 9th floor is a long climb of dry. She works that out with no help from anybody by touching it, and she goes back down the stair and swaps the mud by hand. That is the arrangement she comes to. Every few days, down with the cup, out with the old, in with the new, and up again. It is why the thing is alive, and it is why it never puts out more than a leaf at a time, and I do not know one word of any of it yet, and she is 12 years old and running a farm of her own on the 9th floor. The man comes up out of the dark on the 8th day, and I hear him before I see him, because he is talking as he wades. He is talking to himself about a bearing. He is somewhere in his 40s, wide through the middle, in waders mended with the wrong color, and he stops in front of me with his lamp up and asks why the number 2 wall pump is running when he did not start it. I cleared the intake, I say. It was full of rag. He looks at me. He looks at the pump, which is his pump, on his level, which he has walked every night for 20 years. I can see him deciding whether to be angry about it, and then deciding it is not worth the trouble, and then he sits down on the ledge and starts talking about valves. His name is Ort. He is out of Sump 3, which is 2 levels further down and completely under, and he has spent 20 years pumping water that comes straight back in behind him, and he has never once said that as though it were sad. There was a valve, he says. It stuck open on the number 2 riser 12 years ago, and what he tells about it has no ending. There is a bar in it, and a rat, and a man called Dens, who drops out of it after the 3rd sentence. At one point, Ort stops to work out which month it was and gets it wrong twice, and corrects himself both times out loud. Sona has come down the stair halfway through, and stands there with her boots hanging off 2 fingers, and lets it happen to her. When he finishes, she says nothing at all, and Ort does not notice, because Ort has never expected anybody to say anything. Everybody I know would have moved him along by now. I want him quiet and gone, and instead I ask him about the valve. I ask whether it stuck open or shut, because from his telling of it I could not work out which. Ort stops with his mouth slightly open, and looks at me like a man looking at a door he has leaned on for years that turns out to open. Open, he says. It's stuck open. Nobody ever asks which. Then he tells it again properly, and it takes 90 seconds instead of 4 minutes, and then he asks me what I'm doing down here with a hoe. So I show him, because he is already inside it, and there is no way the next hour goes where he is not. 4 of them know now: Sona, Lipa, Wen, and a pump man who has told nobody anything in 20 years, because nobody has ever asked him a question he could answer. Day 9 comes round. I have the bed marked with a nail scratch on the pillar, and I have counted my way to it morning after morning, and Ort stands behind me with his lamp on the ground while I put the hoe in. Neither of us says anything because we are hoping for 2 completely different things. It comes up in one piece, and it is not food. It is as long as my forearm, the shape of a root, and the color of a root, and there is a dull metal seam running down the middle of it from crown to tip. It weighs about 4 times what a thing that size has any business weighing. Ort says the word for it before I do. He says that is a machine, and then he says it again with a different face on. The drone is gone. There is nothing in the ground where the drone was, no shell, no folded arms, no cell, only the hole its shape left behind, and 6 of these standing in the row where I put one dead machine. I take the smallest one down to the far end of the corridor, 60 feet from anybody, because I want to know what it is, and there is exactly one way to find out. Sona calls down from the stair that I am about to be the stupidest dead man in this building. I put a hand on each end and snap it in 2, and nothing happens. The break is white and wet inside like a real root, and there is a core down the middle of it packed hard, and I stand there holding 2 halves feeling like a fool. And because I am frightened, I have already started counting out loud the way I do. 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes at 5, and the sound arrives in my chest before it arrives in my ears. The water lifts. The far bulkhead, which has been rotting under 8 feet of standing water since before Ort had this job, opens like a wet sack, and I am on my back in the silt with my ears ringing. Ort has his hand under my arm, and he is shouting something I cannot hear a word of, and behind him the water in the corridor is going somewhere, which is a thing water in this corridor has not done in 30 years. It drops a hand's width from end to end. 12 feet of floor at the high end come up out of the black and sit there steaming, and Sona walks out onto it in bare feet, and it is the first dry ground under the water line in 30 years. Nobody says anything clever. Ort takes his cap off, which I have never seen him do, and I take a nail out of my pocket and scratch a line on the pillar where the water is standing now. Then I stand back and look at it. It is one scratch on a wet pillar, and it is the smallest thing that has ever happened to anybody, and I cannot stop looking at it, and neither can he. Ort sits down on the step. He does not talk about pumps. He sits a long time with his hands hanging between his knees, and he is not a man who is any good at silence, so it costs him something to do it. Then he asks whether I can do that again. That night, out on the water line, 2 men on the night crew of Dawson Rule's pump barge hear a thump come up through the hull and put their hands flat on the deck plate to feel for the next one. One of them says settling. The other one says settling as well, and writes it in the book with the time against it, and in the morning he mentions it to the man who owns everything below floor 1, and the man says nothing at all and goes on eating. Ort does arithmetic the way other men hum. He is on his back under the number 2 pump with his arms in it to the elbow, and he is telling the ceiling what a second-hand impeller pump costs at the waterline, which is 300 chits, and what it does for you, which is 20 feet of corridor dried out a day. A sorter makes 4 chits in a day, he says, and a day's paste is 2, so a sorter saves 2, so 300 chits is 150 days of a man eating nothing. He says it without any feeling in it. He is not complaining. He is just a man who likes a sum to come out. I have 11 chits. I have had them since the stamping machine, and 2 of Ort's 4 pumps are down with the same fault and are going to stay down, because the impellers went years ago and nobody replaces an impeller on a level that produces nothing. So the corridor dries at the speed of 2 bad pumps and 1 boy with a bucket, which is about a foot a day, and I have 4 rows in and a level still underwater, and I am 18 years old and I can do that sum myself. Terrell Syke comes down the stair on the 11th day with his hands in his pockets and his lamp on his belt, whistling, which nobody does down here, and stops at the edge of the dry 12 feet and looks at it for a long moment. He is about 35. He has a barge crew jacket with the sleeves cut off and forearms like cable, and he introduces himself before I can ask, which is a thing men with standing do and men on my floor never do. He says he came down to see what dropped a bulkhead. Then he looks at the rows, and at the wall pump running, and at the line I scratched on the pillar, and he does not laugh at any of it, which after all this time is a strange sensation, like standing up too fast. Somebody down here is finally worth something, he says. He says it looking at the rows and not at me, as if he were saying it to himself, and I merely happen to be there, and something in my chest turns over and lies the other way up. He is a grown man off the barge crew, and he has said the sentence out loud in the same corridor where the machine said farmer. Ort behind me says nothing. Ort has been quiet since the man arrived, and he is a man who is never quiet, and I notice that, and I do not do anything about it. Syke wants to know what the noise was, so I show him one. I turn it so the seam catches the light and tell him the rules as you would tell somebody in a kitchen. You do not snap it. Snapping is the whole of it. Fire does nothing, water does nothing, dropping it does nothing. He asks whether he can hold it, and I let him. And he holds it away from his body with both hands like somebody else's baby. And then he laughs, and the laugh is genuine, and I like him. He has an impeller on the barge, second-hand off a stripped pump, no use to anybody up there. He would want 3 of these for it. It takes about 90 seconds, and nobody argues about terms. He does not haggle, and I do not haggle, because haggling would mean this was a transaction between 2 men who did not trust each other, and I have just been told I am worth something. He goes up the stair with 3 of them wrapped in his jacket and his hand raised over his shoulder and never once turning round, and I stand there holding an impeller and feeling about 9 feet tall. Ort takes the impeller off me and turns it over and says it is a good one. Then he carries it down the corridor to the pump, and he does not say a single other word about the man, and I follow him and I do not ask, and both of us know exactly what the other one is not saying. It works. That is the thing about it that makes the next 4 weeks so easy to live in. The pump runs all night with a noise like a man clearing his throat, and by the following evening the water in the main corridor is off the floor along 200 feet. 200 feet of dry stone under the waterline, still steaming, still black with silt an inch deep on it, and the line on the pillar moves down a full hand's width, and I put a new scratch under the old one. Ort walks it end to end 4 times that night. He measures it in strides and gets a different number twice, and does it a 5th time to settle it. I put in food, not the metal, food, because I have watched what one dead machine did to one bed, and after the machine came out the ground there went gray, and stayed gray, and nothing I put in it since has done anything at all, and the fishbone bed is on its 2nd crop. So the rule of the place is simple enough to say once and never say again. Bone and shell and rot come up as something you can eat, and that ground goes on forever. Metal comes up as a thing that goes off at 5, and that ground gives you 1, and then it is finished, and it does not come back. Ort asks whether the finished ground can be washed. I tell him no. He asks it twice more that week, in the same words, and the third time he asks it, standing on the bed it happened to. 9 days, I say to Ort, and I say the day, and he writes it on the pillar with the nail because I ask him to, and because he wants a job with a nail in it. Deb Vance comes down to the waterline on the 14th day. She is 68 years old, off floor 11, and she takes 6 flights on knees that argue with her the entire climb, and she arrives out of breath and furious and not about the smell. She has a paper packet in her hand and she holds it up before she says anything at all. She bought it off Barch Osk for 4 chits, she says, because she saw the handwriting on it. And the handwriting is Tamsin Vert's, and Tamsin Vert has been dead a year, and Deb Vance would like somebody to explain to her what a dead friend's seeds are doing going up a ladder at 4 chits a packet. I tell her the collector took them for the tithe because I had no cans. Deb says a short word about the collector. Then she says a longer one, and Sona, who is sitting on the step lacing her boots, stops lacing to listen properly. Then Deb sees the rose. She goes down the steps into the water in her shoes with her hand on the wall, and she wades to the first row, and she stands there, and nobody helps her, because she is not the sort of woman you help without being asked. I put one in her hand. She turns it over, the way Barch turned it over, and it is the same movement in 2 different bodies, and one of them means, "What does this cost?" and the other one means, "It cannot be," and she gets her thumb through the skin without being shown. "It is a beat," she says. Sona says that is not a word, and Ort says he has never heard it either, and Deb says she does not particularly care what either of them has heard. She eats it standing in the black water in her shoes, on a level that was drowned before Sona was born, and the water coming off her chin is red. "A beat," she says again with her mouth full, to nobody. Her mother had a picture of one. Her mother had a picture of a lot of things. Sona says she is calling it a red. Ort agrees that red is easier. Deb tells them both they are ignorant and she is right, and they will still be calling them reds a year from now, and so will everybody else. And I already know that watching her lose the argument. Then she goes quiet, because she has seen the stone. She does not walk to it. She stands where she is with the water round her ankles and looks at the corner of it showing above the sill. She says the name before she is close enough to read the plate. She says Hessel the way you say a name out loud in a room where somebody is asleep, and then she says nothing else for a while. Sona asks who Hessel is. Deb does not answer her. She asks me instead whether I dug the cap off myself, and I say yes. And she asks how long it took, and I say 11 minutes, and she nods once, as if that were the right answer to a question I did not hear. Deb asks me what Tamsin ever told me about any of it. I give her the one thing I have, which I have been saying to myself in the water for a fortnight in my grandmother's voice, because it is all I have got of her. Dirt is everything that ever died. That is what she said, in a kitchen, when I was 11 and wanted my dinner. Deb looks at me for a moment when I say it and starts to say something and then does not, and I put it down to her knees. I ask her what he was. She says she is not telling me that today, Noah. She says it flatly and without apology, which on my floor is the politest possible refusal, and then she gives me the one piece she is willing to give. He did not stop, she says. He was stopped, and she puts the packet in my hand and closes my fingers over it with both of hers and goes back up the stairs on her bad knees at her own speed and does not let anybody walk behind her. That is 6 of them who know. Sona, Lipa, Wen, Ort, Deb, and me, and I have not chosen a single one of them. That evening, I carry a plate up to the 9th floor, and Wen keeps it down. She has kept nothing down in a month, and she eats a whole one sitting on the end of the mattress with her hand flat on her chest, and then she sits very still, waiting for the argument, and it does not come. She does not thank me. She asks me who else has seen the rows, and when I tell her 6, she says that is 4 too many, and she is not wrong, and she is doing exactly what Lipa does with the numbers she is frightened of. Lipa says her mother is on day 8. Nobody asked her. A cartridge is 9 chits, and it runs 11 days, and Wen is on day 8 of 1, and Lipa says it as you would say the time, and then she goes back to whatever she was doing. Wen tells her not to count out loud. Lipa says she was not counting, she was remembering, and those are two different things, and Wen has no answer for that at all, and neither do I. That night, out on the waterline, Terrell Syke puts 3 roots on the deck of the pump barge under a work light and tells 2 men what they are. Neither of them believes him. One of them says it is a vegetable and asks whether he has been buying stories off floor 9 again. Syke tells him to take it up the deck and snap it, and the man does, laughing 40 feet away with his back turned, and stands there holding 2 halves and telling the others there is nothing in it. He gets to 4 before he understands what Syke is shouting at him. He goes into the water on his own and comes up on the far side of the mooring, and the blast takes the deck rail with it, and afterwards nobody on the barge says anything for a while. The crew learn the count of 5 that night, the hard way, and they are careful about it forever afterwards. Dawson Rule is not aboard. He is up on floor 1 with his crews, eating, and he hears about it in the morning with the log in front of him and a mug in his hand. He does not send anybody down. He does not ask for a name. He listens to the whole of it, and then he asks whether the rail can be welded back on tonight, and that is all he does about it, and that is what frightens me. The table is a cable drum on its end, with 2 crates pushed against it, and it is the first table under the waterline in 30 years, and it seats 4 if 2 of them are not fussy about elbows. 42 feet of rows behind it, in one corridor, on ground that was under 8 feet of standing water when I was still queuing at the stamping machine, there is 1 lamp hung off a conduit hook, and the light on the wet stone goes further than it has any right to. Ort counts us. He gets 5. He counts Lipa twice because the cup is sitting on the drum beside her plate, and he has been told all week that the cup is hers. So somewhere in his head, the cup has become a person. Lipa says the cup does not eat. Ort says he knows the cup does not eat, and counts again and says 4 with the air of a man closing a book, and then he says 4 out loud a second time as if trying it for weight. 4 mouths. That is the number, and it goes on the pillar under the waterline, scratched with the same nail, and I do not know yet why I want it written down, only that I want it written down where I can see it while I work. We eat 2 reds each and a handful of the small green ones out of the fishbone bed that nobody has a word for. Ort calls them the sour ones. Wen calls them the ones that get in your teeth, and both names are in use by the end of the meal. Wen laughs at something. It is not a big laugh, and it costs her about half a minute of breathing afterwards with her hand on the drum, but it happens in front of me, and I have known this woman my whole life, and I have heard her do that perhaps 4 times, and now I am standing in a flooded corridor under a dead city, at a table made out of a cable drum, watching Lipa mime the collector wiping his palms before touching a child's cup, and her mother laughing about it with red on her chin, and if somebody had told me a month ago what a farm turns out to be, I would have called them a liar to their face. Tithe day comes round again, and this time I leave one out on purpose. I want to know whether the thing I saw was a man being tired or a man being what he is. So I put a red on the table where the lamp catches it, and I stand exactly where I stood last time, and I wait to be robbed. Barch comes in with the rag and the list. He looks at it straight away. He wipes his palms and picks it up and turns it over twice, and I can see him going through that drawer again from the beginning, and finding the same nothing at the back of it. "Where does a man sell one of these?" he says. I tell him I have no idea, which is the 3rd time I have said that sentence to him, and the first time it has been a weapon. He says that is what he thought. He sets it back down beside the lamp, exactly where it was, square to the edge, because he is tidy. Then he takes Lipa's cup and he dries his palms on the rag first. He does that before lifting a child's cup off a table, and Lipa does not move and does not say a word, and Wen's hand goes flat on the drum. I am 4 feet away, and I do nothing at all, because doing something is how the whole of this ends inside a week, and I get to hear myself think that while a grown man handles a girl's cup. He carries it to the door. He tips it slightly to look into it in the light, and what he sees is a cracked cup with wet mud in it, and a stick with 2 leaves on the stick, and he makes a small noise through his nose. He puts it back on the table and takes a bucket instead, and says a floor with no cans is a floor that has to be creative, and goes. The door shuts, and Lipa picks up her cup with both hands and holds it against her front and does not say one word. And that is the second time the whole of this survives, because a man who takes things for a living cannot price a thing that has no price. The first time was luck. The second time I arranged, and it is worse because now I know exactly how thin it is, and I know I will be standing here again next week. 2 days after that, I do the stupidest thing I do all month, and it does not look stupid while I am doing it. It looks like management. There is a man on floor 11 called Red Gano who hauls for anybody, and I need silt moved off the drain end of the corridor, and I have food and no chits, so I offer him a day's food for a day of hauling. He looks at what is on the plate for a long time, and then he says yes. He works all day and he works hard, and he does not talk. And once, near the middle of the afternoon, he stops and looks at the hoe leaning against the pillar and asks me what the stick is for. I tell him it is what they gave me. He says right and goes back to hauling, and that is the last thing Red Gano ever says to me. When the shift is over, I put a plate in his hands, and he eats it standing by the stair with his back to us, facing the water, and then he says thank you and goes up. He does not come back the next day. He does not come back any day. Nobody upstairs starts talking either, so wherever he has put it somewhere and shut the lid. All I have is a man who ate at my level and went home. Lipa watches me trying to work out what went wrong with the arithmetic, and gets there about an hour before I do. "You did not ask him to sit down, Noah," she says. She says it while scraping the drum with a bit of wire, not even looking up. Ort says that if you feed a man standing up, he is being paid. And if you feed him sitting down, he is being fed. And it is the only clever thing Ort says all week, and he says it without knowing. It is clever. I never hire anybody again. Not once. Not in any of what comes after. I would like to say I understood it that evening. What I do that evening is get angry with a bucket. The bill for the barge crew arrives on the 4th day of the week, at the top of the sump stair, in the arms of a woman called Ans. There has been a dispute at the waterline about a stripped hauler. Somebody built a barricade of drum halves across a gangway to hold a wreck they had claim on, and somebody else came at the barricade, and one of them had 3 roots with dull metal seams down the middle. They put all 3 of them on the barricade and snapped them where they stood, and counted, because by then everybody at the waterline had learned to count. Coyle was behind that barricade. Coyle, floor 9, 3 doors down from Wen, who paid Barchosk 11 chits for a paper packet because it was a collector's item, and he wanted a thing nobody could price. His sister Ans carries him up 9 flights herself, with 2 men taking the corners, and the landing comes out for it. His right hand is wrapped in somebody's shirt, and the shirt is wet through, and his fingers are not where fingers go. Marta from 10 says it was a gas pocket. Pole says gas does not do that. Ve Marchetti says it was the barge crew doing something with cutting charges and getting it wrong, and everybody agrees that it was the barge crew, and everybody is right in a way that does not help. I stand on the landing with the rest of my floor, and I watch a man be carried past me who cannot close his hand, and there is nobody in this building who knows where those 3 went up the stair from except me. I do not say anything. That is the whole of what I do that evening. I go down the stair with my ears full, and I stand in front of the rows for a while, and then I start work, because the beds do not care. The next morning I take the impeller out of the pump and sell it back up the water line for 9 chits, which is what a filter cartridge costs, and Ort is standing there while I do it. He does not shout. He asks me whether I know what an impeller is worth, and I say 300 less the pump, and he says no. It is worth 20 feet of corridor a day, and that is a different sum entirely, and you have just sold me a fortnight. I tell him Wen is on day 11. He says he knows what day Wen is on. Everybody knows what day Wen is on, and that is not the argument, and I know it is not the argument. Then he goes and spends a week rebuilding the original impeller out of the number 4 pump with packing and wire and a piece of somebody's boot, and it runs at half rate, and he never mentions it again, and he never lets me forget it either. I buy the cartridge. I put it in Wen's hand on the 9th floor, and she cracks the seal and fits it and takes 3 breaths with her eyes closed. And for those 3 breaths, it is the best money anybody has ever spent. Then it is 11 days, and her lungs are years. That is the arithmetic of a cartridge, and everybody in that room can do it. And Lipa does it out loud because she cannot help herself, and Wen tells her to stop, and she stops. Sona comes down that night with a count of her own. 2 more couriers use the waterline shortcut at shift change, and both of them have started asking her what is down the sump stair, and she has been telling them nothing is down the sump stair. 11 days, she says. She has been lying to 2 people she works beside for every one of those days, and she has counted them all because she keeps counts as she keeps roots, and she wants me to know the number rather than the feeling. I tell her she should tell me if they get close. She says that is not what she came down to say, and then she does not say what she came down to say, and goes. Lipa is on the crate by the stair when I come up, with the cup in her lap, in the dark, waiting for me. She has been waiting a while. She asks it flatly, the way she asks what day the cartridge is on. "What did you give the man off the barge?" she says, and I answer straight away, because it is a small question, and I have 100 things to carry up before I sleep. 3 of the metal ones, for the impeller. She does not say anything back. She picks the cup up off her knees and goes in and shuts the door, and I go on up with the crates. I am halfway up the next flight when I hear it. Not her, and not Lipa, and not one other person on that whole stair. Me. My own voice in a stairwell, saying 3 of the metal ones, 3 doors down from a man who cannot close his hand. 9 days on the second bed, and the problem I have now is one I could not have imagined a month ago, which is that there is too much food. 2 corridors dry, rows down both of them. On the 9th morning, I pull more out of the ground in an hour than everybody at that drum can eat in a day, and it is lying on the drum in the lamplight, looking like the single most incriminating object in 90 levels. Ort wants to store it. He has a room in mind, off the stair, with a door that shuts. Sona says a room with a door that shuts, and food in it is not storage. It is a room full of proof, and asks him what he thinks happens the first time somebody puts their head round it. Deb says, give it away. Give it to floor 11, give it to the 8s, hand it out, and let people be grateful, because a floor with a full stomach does not talk to a collector. I tell her no. Giving it away is 100 witnesses in a week. Nobody has a third idea. We stand round a cable drum piled with more than we can eat. 4 people in a dry corridor under a dead city. And the situation is that we are rich and it might kill us. And Ort says out loud that it is a shame you cannot eat a thing twice. Lipa breaks it 2 days later, and she does it out of love, which is how these things get broken. Her cup has 4 leaves on it. 5 weeks of going down the sump stair every 3rd day and carrying wet silt up all those flights against her chest, and it has put out 4 leaves and then stopped, and she has decided the reason is that it has never once seen light. Ours is a floor of gray walls and 1 strip lamp per landing, so what she means by light is the landing, and one afternoon she takes the cup out and sets it on the ledge under the strip and sits down beside it with her arms round her knees to wait. 3 people see it. Marta from 10 sees it on her way down. A woman off 8 sees it. Pole sees it and asks what it is, and Lipa, who has never once in her life lied badly, says it is a stick, and Pole looks at the 4 leaves on the stick and says right. By that evening, floor 11 is talking about a girl on 9 who has a plant, and by the following morning somebody has set it on the ladder where a man doing a water run could hear it. I go up and take it off her, and I do it in the corridor, in front of Marta and in front of the woman off 8, and I do it the way you take a thing off a child who has picked up something dangerous. I say it is mud in a cup, and I am sick of the smell of it. And I say it too loudly, and I carry it away down the stair. She does not cry. She looks at me the way she looks at a number she does not like, and she goes inside and she does not speak to me for 12 days. It works exactly as I need it to work. Marta tells the landing that it was mud in a cup. The woman off 8 tells somebody on 11 that there was no plant, there was never a plant, there was a girl with a cup of dirt, and a man who took it off her because the room stank. 2 floors put 1 account down and pick up a better one, and the better one is that nothing is happening on the 9th, and I stand at the foot of the stair listening to it happen, and I have never felt worse about anything I have done deliberately. Wen comes out onto the landing and tells Marta that I was right, and that she has been meaning to throw the thing out for a month. She says it clearly in front of people, and then she goes back in and shuts the door, and she does not look at me once while she does it. I take the cup down that night and I do not wash it out. I dig a hole in the best square foot of ground I have, in the middle bed, and I put the cup in it, cup and all, up to the rim, so it is still a cup and it is still hers. Then I scratch a line in the stone beside it with the nail, so that anybody working that bed can see where not to put a hoe, and I tell Ort that nobody eats that one, and Ort takes it more seriously than he takes the pumps. He builds a guard round it out of wire. He checks it twice a night. When Sona reaches over it to get past, he tells her not to, and Sona says she has been reaching over things her whole working life, and Ort says not over this one, and that is the end of the discussion. Coil comes down 4 days later because his sister makes him. Ans brings him to the top of the sump stair and does not come down, and then she does come down, because she was never going to let him do it on his own. His right hand is in a wrap, and the fingers are curled in on themselves, and they are not coming back out, and he holds the wrist of it with his other hand the whole way down the stair. He stands on the last step looking at 2 corridors of rows under strung lamps, and whatever he was expecting, it was not this. He asks whether it is true that it is food. I do not offer him work. I do not say a word about a barricade, or about 3 roots, or about a man off the barge crew, because if I open my mouth about any of that, it becomes a thing I need him to forgive, and that is a job I would be giving to a man with one hand. I put a plate in front of him. Then I put another one down opposite it for his sister, and I pull the crate out with my foot, so it is obvious the crate is for sitting on. He sits down. He eats with his left hand, and he is slow and clumsy with it, and nobody watches him do it, because Ort has started telling Ans about the number 4 pump, and Ans is being polite, and Deb is arguing with Sona about a word. Halfway through he stops and puts his good hand into his coat and takes out a paper packet and puts it on the drum beside my plate. He says he bought it off the collector for 11 chits, because it was the only thing on the man's tray that nobody could put a price on. He says he does not know what is inside it and never opened it, and he would rather it was down here than in his coat. It is my grandmother's handwriting. It is packet 1, and it has been in a sorter's pocket for 5 weeks, and it comes back to me from a man whose hand is ruined by a thing I sold, and he hands it over, as though he were the one who owed something. I do not tell him. It is not a decision I make. It is a thing I do not do over and over all evening, while he sits at my table and eats. 9 mouths that night. Me, Lipa, Wen, Ort, Sona, Deb, Coil, Ans, and a man off 7 called Bez who came down with Ans and has not said anything to anybody and eats like he is being timed. The barge crew come down 2 mornings after that, and it is not a raid. That is what makes it work. There are 3 of them in daylight hours, friendly, with the name Terrell Psych in their mouths in the first 10 seconds, and they have brought a crate to put things in. They want 12. They have talked about it on the way down, and they have the number ready, and they say it as you say a number to a man who is going to say yes. I say no. Not cleverly, because I do not have anything clever. I say no, and then, because the silence needs something in it, I say that the metal ones cost me ground, and I do not have ground to spend this week, which is true and which they do not understand. The big one on the left explains that Psych traded fair. I say Psych traded fair. He says then, what is the difficulty? And I say there is no difficulty, I am just not doing it, and I am aware while I am saying it that my voice has gone up at the end. And nothing happens. They stand in a corridor with 9 people in it and a crate in their hands, and the crate has gone the wrong shape, and none of them moves. What they are working out is the thing I have not let myself think about since the first bulkhead went. In 90 levels of chrome and cabling, there is precisely 1 pair of hands that makes these, and the hands are attached to a boy holding a hoe. You cannot take that. You can take the crop, you can take the level, you can take the boy and put him somewhere, and the thing still only happens where he is standing. The one on the left works it out first, and it goes across his face, and then the second one gets there and looks at the first one, and then they are going up the stair with an empty crate and saying nothing. Bez, who has not spoken in 2 days, says my name afterwards, and it is not Noah. He says something in front of it, the way men on the floors say a foreman's name, and Ans hears him do it and does the same thing an hour later without noticing, and I stand there with a hoe in my hand and my ears going hot. Coil just laughs. Coyle says he has never seen 3 men go up a ladder that fast with nothing in a box. That night, Ort is doing his rounds, and I ask him a question I should have asked 3 weeks ago, which is where the water goes. Up the risers, he says, as though I had asked him what color the wall is. That is where risers go. You take it off the floor, and it goes up the standpipe, and after that, it is somebody else's water. I say right, and he says right. And that is all of it, and neither of us thinks about it again for 2 days. Then he says the other thing, in exactly the same voice, to nobody, while coiling a line. Every level down here is held dry by a gate, he says, and gates want looking at, and he does his on Tuesdays. Deb asks him whether he wants more, and he says yes, and the sentence goes into the floor and dies there. Up on floor 11 that night, Deb Vance sits in a woman's room with 2 cups of hot water between them. The woman lost a brother the year they drowned the level, and she talks about him and about the sound the gates made, and asks Deb whether she has heard the talk about the sump stair. Deb says she has heard nothing. She says it easily. She lets the woman go on, and she looks at the wall over her shoulder, and she says no again at the end of it, and then she stays another hour so that leaving does not look like the lie. Below all of that, I am on my knees in the second bed with the lamp on the floor beside me, working the deep end of it by feel because the light will not reach that far, and the only sound down here is my own hands in the sill. On the 9th floor, at some point in the small hours, a tap over a sink that has been dry for 30 years makes a noise. Nobody hears it. It coughs twice, and knocks, and runs about a cupful of brown water into a basin, and stops. In the morning, a man on the 9th tells his wife the pipes are settling, and she tells him the pipes have not settled in 30 years, and both of them forget about it before the end of the day. The tap on floor 9 runs on a Tuesday morning at about the hour the shift bell goes, and the first person to see it is a woman called Elsie Trabe, who has lived on that floor since she was 19, and has never once turned that handle for any reason except habit. It coughs and knocks, and then it runs brown for a count of 10, and then it runs clear, and she stands there with her hand still on it and her mouth open, and she does not turn it off, because turning it off might be the end of it. By the middle of the morning, there are 14 people in that corridor. Somebody has brought a basin. Pohl is explaining that the pressure has come back from the upper mains, and that he said all along the mains were sound, and nobody is arguing with him because everybody is watching the water. Then 10 goes. And then, before the shift ends, 7 and 8, and by nightfall there are 4 floors of this building with water coming out of the wall for the first time in the lifetime of anybody standing on them. I am below the waterline with my arms in a bed when Ort comes down the corridor at a speed I have not seen him move at in 2 months, and he does not say hello, and he stops in front of me and stands there working his jaw. The risers, he says. It has been going up the risers. We have been taking 9 feet of standing water off a level and putting it into a standpipe for 2 months, and a standpipe goes up, because that is the entire purpose of a standpipe, and the pumps on this building push water as high as floor 20 and no higher. Everything under floor 20 is carried, cans up the ladders, a run a floor a week, 1 man to a stretch for 30 years, and it has been that way so long that nobody on my floor thinks of it as an arrangement. They think of it as the shape of the world. Ort sits down on a crate and puts his hands on his knees and says it twice more to himself. He has pumped water off these levels since before I was born, and every day of it the water came straight back, and now it has gone somewhere, and the somewhere is 4 floors of taps. I ask him whether we should stop. He says, "Stop what, Noah?" I say, "Stop pumping." He looks at me like a man who has been asked whether he should stop breathing, and says that if I want the rouse dry, the water goes up the pipe, and there is no third place for it to go. Barch Osk does his run on the Thursday, because it is Thursday. He fills at the intake on floor 1 the way he has filled every Thursday for 11 years. 2 cans on the yoke and 1 in the hand, and he takes them up to 7, and 7 is fine, and 7 is polite about it. On 8, a man meets him at the top of the flight and tells him not to bother with the end rooms because they have got it out of the wall. He says it apologetically. Barch says right, and takes the cans past him anyway and knocks on those doors, and 2 of them answer, and neither of them takes any. On 9, it is Elsie Trabe. She has known him 20 years. She comes out onto the landing with her sleeves wet because she has spent 2 days washing everything she owns, and she is happy, and her happiness is the worst thing that happens to him all week. She tells him kindly. She says it is good news because it is good news, and she says he must be pleased because that is 4 flights he will not have to do, and she asks after his boy. He wipes his palms on the rag. He sets the can down on the landing beside the door because he has carried it up 9 flights and there is nowhere else to put it. He stands at the top of ladder 9 with a full can and nowhere to take it. Ladder 9 is the social life of these floors. There are people on the steps. There are people at the rail, there is a queue at the stamping machine because it is a stamping day, and every single one of them sees it, and not one person says anything unkind. That is what I keep coming back to. Not one person on that ladder jeers at him. Vay Marchetti gets up and takes the can off him and carries it down for him and hands it back at the bottom, and Barch thanks him, and that is somehow the worst thing in it. The tithe goes with it in the same week because the tithe was never a law, it was the run. He carried water up and took cans and cartridges and whatever else was worth carrying back down, and he traded it on, and the arrangement worked because he was necessary. On the Thursday, nobody puts anything out, and not out of defiance. There is simply nothing owed to a man who has not brought anything, and everybody worked that out separately and quietly, and by the following week there is no tithe on 7 to 11, and there never is again. I do not do anything about it. I never say a word against him on any landing in that week, and I do not have to, and there is no version of this where that makes me clean. Nell Osk is 10 years old and has his father's rag over his own shoulder because he has been copying him since he could walk. He goes with him on the last run and carries the small can and does it properly. At the bottom of the ladder, when the cans are back on the rack and there is nothing to do with his hands, he asks his father what they do tomorrow. Barch does not answer. He takes the rag off his shoulder and goes over both palms with it, which is the thing he does before he takes hold of something, and there is nothing there to take hold of, and he does it anyway, and then he tells the boy to go home. The queue starts forming somewhere else inside 4 days. A woman on 8 tells 2 people that if they go down the sump stair past the water line and turn left, there is a man down there with food, and by the end of the week, a dozen people have come down that stair, and I have invited exactly none of them. I cannot stop it. I cannot go up and talk to anybody about it either, because a bed only moves on the days I have my hands in it, and 2 days upstairs is 2 days added to every row I have in the ground. So they come, and they stand at the bottom of the stair with their hands at their sides, and Deb puts them to work, and Anns feeds them, and Coyle shows them where not to walk, and I go on turning over ground 40 feet away. 20 at the table by the 9th day of it. 20. Ort scratches the number under the waterline on the pillar and stands back from it, and then he counts it again in his head, out loud, and gets 21, and Lipa tells him he has counted the cup. A man off 7 called Robin asks whether he can look at the hoe, and I hand it to him. He takes it in both hands and holds it out at arm's length and turns it over, and he does not laugh, and nobody around him laughs either, and he asks how you hold it when you are working. So I show him. It is the same iron head on the same wooden handle that came out of a drawer in front of 11 people, and something has changed about the room it is standing in, and nobody says anything about that, and everybody notices. 20 mouths is more than 2 corridors can carry, and there is only one way to get a 3rd corridor, and it is not a nice way. The bulkhead at the far end is sound. Sound bulkheads want a charge. A charge means a metal bed, and a metal bed gives 1 harvest, and then that ground is finished, and it does not come back, and I have 4 beds in sump 1 that would run food forever. I pick the 3rd one along because it is the smallest and because it is the furthest from the cup, and I bury a stripped conduit box in it and say the date out loud, and everybody at the table hears me do it. Ort says whose dinner that is. He says it flatly, while eating, with the plate in his hand, and he names the bed by what came out of it last time and how much, and then he goes back to eating and does not look up. Bed's gone sour. 1. That number goes on the pillar 2, on its own, further down, and it is the only one on that wall that is ever going to go up when things are going well. 9 days later, I snap the root at the bulkhead, and count out loud, and Robin counts with me and is a full number behind the entire time, and gets to 4 when I get to 5, and afterwards there is a third corridor and 400 more feet of floor coming out of the water. The chute is Ort's find, and he is so pleased with it that he tells the whole of it 4 times in one evening, to 4 people, 2 of whom were standing beside him when he found it. There is a waistline out of the level 64 vat bays that discharges at the waterline, and it has been discharging there since the bays were built, and what comes out of it is gray sludge with the tank scrapings in it, and it is free, and it never stops. We start carting it down in drums on a hand truck. It goes into the ground and it feeds the ground, and the rows come up thicker in the beds we put it on, and for 6 weeks I am pleased with myself about it every time I look at a drum. Nobody up there is sending it to us. That is simply where the pipe goes, and it has been going there for 30 years with nobody at the bottom of it, and now there is somebody at the bottom of it. Sona runs a delivery up to 64 the same week because she has Route 41 and the intake bays are on it, and she goes in past the wash channel with silt on her boots the way she has silt on her boots every day now, and she does not think about it once. That evening, in Vat Bay 7 on level 64, Irma Guy pulls the intake screen on the number 4 tank, which she has pulled on the same day of the cycle for 20 years. She takes it out and turns it under the light and picks a fibrous thread off it with her fingernails. She holds it up. She rubs it between her fingers and smells her fingers, and then she sits down on the step of the tank with the screen still in her other hand. There is a report book on the bench 4 steps away with a pen on a string. She does not go to it. She puts the thread in her coat pocket and buttons the pocket. She stays sitting there long after the shift bell, and nobody comes to ask what she is doing, because she has been the person who does not need asking for 20 years. There is exactly 1 person alive in this building who would know what that thread is, and she is sitting on a tank step with it buttoned into her coat, and she has told nobody. 400 feet below her, a hand truck goes down the water line and comes back full of free gray sludge out of her own tanks. 20 mouths and 1 body. That sum has an answer, and the answer is no, and I find it out the slow way, standing in a corridor with wet arms in front of a woman off floor 8 called Nita Sar, who wants me to come up and look at her sister. Her sister has the same thing Wen has, and it has gone into her the same way, and Nita has been on the stair 3 mornings running, waiting for me to be somewhere she can stand. I tell her I cannot come up today. She asks about tomorrow. I say not tomorrow either, and she stands there with her hands in her sleeves and asks me, reasonably, what exactly it is I do all day, since from where she is standing the food is already in the ground, and I have no answer she can use. I cannot say that the ground only counts the days I stand in it, because that sentence is the single most dangerous thing I own. So I tell her I will send it up with somebody, and she says her sister does not want it sent up, and goes. I cannot come up. Not for an afternoon, not for an hour that turns into an afternoon. A bed goes 9 days from planting to pulling, and it only counts the days I am standing in it, and a day up a ladder is a day added to every row I have in the ground. I have not been above floor 1 in 9 days. I say that out loud at the table, and it lands like a boast, which is not how I meant it. And Deb looks at me over her plate and says that a man who cannot leave his own floor has a word for that, Noah, and it is not farmer. Coyle counts the beds with me every morning now because he has decided that is his job. He gets it wrong by 2 on the 11th bed, twice running, and both times he laughs about it, and both times I have to walk the row again to be sure, and it is funny. Irma Gay comes down the sump stair on the 9th day of that, on her own legs, at 58 years of age, in Vat Bay boots with the shanks still stiff. She has not asked anybody where to go. Her tanks draw their water off the waterline through one straight intake line from level 64, and it is her line, and she has the keys to all of it, and she has walked down beside her own pipe 400 feet through the service shafts, and at the bottom of it she stopped and stood still and followed the only thing in this building I have never once been able to shut in a room, which is the smell. She does not gasp at the rouse. She stands where the stair comes down with her hands behind her back and looks at them the way Ort looks at a pump, and the first thing out of her mouth is a question with a floor under it. "What is under the beds that die?" she says. "Not how do you do it, not what are you, not who told you." She has picked the exact question that opens the whole of it, in one line, standing in her boots, and she has been below the waterline for about 90 seconds. I tell her the Greens have not sent anybody down here in 30 years, and I am not sure what she thinks she is inspecting. That is my whole answer. She came off level 64, so she is a 64 problem, and I have 20 mouths and 1 body and 11 days of beds in front of me, and I file her, standing up, in about 4 seconds, in front of Ort and Sona and 4 other people. She does not argue. She does not even look put out. She says right, in the voice you use when a thing has been confirmed rather than refused, and then she asks whether she may walk the rows, and I say yes, because saying no twice in a minute is beyond me. She walks them for 40 minutes with her hands clasped at her back and her chin down, and she names them quietly, to herself, as she goes. She calls the reds beets, which Deb already did, and which nobody uses. She calls the sour ones charred. She stops at the 4th row and says a word I have never heard in my life, and says it twice, and then a 3rd time with her hand out over the leaves without touching them. Half of what she names, I have been calling something else for 2 months, and hearing her do it is like hearing somebody use your own street name for a place you thought you had invented. Ort asks her what that last one was. She tells him. He says we call them the yellow ones. She says yes, she can see why, and there is not 1 gram of insult in it, and Ort spends the rest of the evening saying the new word wrong. Then she takes a cutting, and she does it in front of everybody standing there, a knife out of her coat, a shoot off the end of the 4th row wrapped in a cloth and put away inside the coat. Then she picks up 2 of my empty drums, carries them down to the softest silt at the water edge, and fills them both with her own hands, and takes her time about choosing where to dig. Nobody stops her. Deb starts to say something and does not finish it. Coyle looks at me. Ans looks at Coyle. Ort says nothing at all, which by now I know is Ort saying a great deal. They say it afterwards, though, when the drums are already gone. Deb wants to know why a woman off 64 walked out of here with my dirt in her arms, and nobody put a hand on a drum, and she is looking at me when she says my dirt. Coyle says she is one woman of about 8 stone. Anne says that is not the point, and Deb says thank you. Sona says the point is that she did not ask, and everybody at that table is old enough to know what it means when somebody does not ask. I tell them she is VAT staff, and VAT staff have their own troubles. It is the flattest thing I say all week, and it closes the conversation, which is what I wanted, and every one of them lets me have it because I am the one with the hands. The thing is, there is no reason to stop her that anybody in that corridor could say out loud. It is not my silt. It is the floor of a building that belongs to a city, and I have been here 4 months, and the woman filling the drums has been keeping this building fed for 20 years. She carries them up the stair herself, 1 at a time, at 58, and refuses the 2 people who offer, and she is out of breath at the top and does not pretend otherwise. On the stair, she meets Sona coming down. She asks her one question, which is whether she runs the 64 intake bays on her route. Sona says 41 takes her through them 4 times a week. Then Irma tells her a fact in the same voice she used about the charred. Couriers who run the intake bays get put on the bay list, and the bay list carries a bed up in the greens and passage to go with it, and there are 2 names on that list at the moment, and there is room. Sona says passage is 8,000 chits. Irma says passage is 8,000 chits or one signature, and she has signed 4 of them in 20 years, and she has never once been asked to explain any of them. Sona has been on this building's ladder since she was 14. She has stood under the vents in the 64 transfer hall where the air comes down off the roof, and she has told me twice what that air is like, and the whole of what she wants in the world is to stand outside once with weather happening on her. She does not say no, she does not say yes either. She says she is on a route, and she goes down past the older woman without looking at her, and Irma goes on up, and neither of them says another word. Below, we are opening sump 2, and it is going badly enough to hold my whole attention, which is convenient for me. The stair down to 2 is a fall of standing water, black, with the top of the doorway 2 feet under it. There is a bulkhead across the head of it, and it is a good one, and a good bulkhead means a charge, and a charge means another bed. I take the second bed this time. The second bed has done 4 crops of reds, and it is the one Wen eats out of, and I put a burnt-out lift motor into it, and I say the date out loud at the table so that everybody knows what it costs before it costs it. Bed's gone sour, too, and it goes on the pillar underneath the one, and Coyle asks whether we are going to run out of pillar before we run out of beds. On the 9th day, at the top of a fall of black water with a root as long as my arm in my hands, I put everybody up the corridor and I count out loud, because I am frightened, and that is what I do. Ort gets to 4 with me and then says wait. He says it because he has thought of something about the gate, and he says a thing at the moment he thinks of it, always. I have 2 halves of a live charge in my hands and a count running. Coyle takes him by both shoulders and walks him 30 feet up the corridor with his feet still going under him. It goes at 5. The water goes down the stair like something being poured out of a jug, and it keeps going for 2 hours, and by the end of it there is another level under this level with a floor on it. Sump's drained. 1.5. Ort scratches it. Then he tells me what he was going to say about the gate, and it is that the gate at the top of 2 wants looking at, and I say fine, and I am not listening, and neither is anybody else in that corridor. Wen has a bad day on the Tuesday and does not tell anybody, because her arrangement with herself is that Lipa is not to spend anything else on her. She sits through it on the edge of the mattress with one hand pressed under her collarbone and the cartridge in her pocket, unused, because a cartridge is 9 chits and 11 days, and if she can get through a bad afternoon on her own, that is a day of it saved. Lipa comes in at dusk and does what she does, which is count. She has the cartridge out of her mother's pocket and up to the light before she has her coat off, and it is day 9 and it is full. She does not shout. She puts it back in the pocket. She sits down on the floor with her back against the mattress and stays there, and Wen puts a hand on her head and neither of them says anything for a long time. Then Wen says she will use it tomorrow. Lipa says she will not. Wen says she will, and Lipa says that is what she said on the 7th, and they leave it there, and neither of them comes down the stair to tell me any of it. I am on the sump 2 stair that evening, with a lamp and a bucket, taking the last of the standing water off the bottom 4 steps by hand, because the pump will not reach them, and because it is the only job left that I can finish in one night. 400 feet above all of that, in Vat Bay 7, Irma-Gi clears the end of her own bench with her forearm and sets down 2 drums of black silt out of a flooded level and a chute wrapped in a cloth. She stands looking at them with her coat still on. She has no class. She has never once in her life put a living thing in the ground and had it come back. What she has is 20 years of keeping things alive in tanks, and a bench, and a whole level of light and heat and clean water, and a woman's worth of patience, and she has not asked me a single question, and she is not going to. Dawson Rule comes down the sump stair on a Tuesday with 4 of his crew behind him, and no weapon anywhere on any of them, and the first thing he does is take his cap off, because he is coming into somewhere people are eating. He is in his 50s, built like a bollard, with hands that have been in cold water for 30 years, and look it. He does not shout at anybody, and he does not look at the rows first. He looks at the people. Then he asks me how long I have been down here, and answers it himself before I can open my mouth. Since the summer, he says, 4 months, give or take a week, because the crew logged a thump in the spring and nothing before it. He does that all evening. He asks and then answers in a friendly way, at just the speed that makes it impossible to get a word in without being rude, and by the end of it I have said about a dozen words, and he knows everything. He walks the rows with his lamp low. He prices them as he goes, out loud, and he is not far wrong on any of it. He says what a corridor of that is worth up the ladder, and what the water pumped off it is worth, and what a barge day costs him, and every figure comes out flat, as fact, not as threat. And then he says his thing, once plainly, standing in the middle of my third corridor with 20 people eating 40 feet behind him. Everything under floor 1 is his, and not by paper. By 30 years of being the only man in 90 levels who would come down here, when it was 9 feet of black water and nobody else in this building would put a boot in it, and he is not wrong about the 30 years and everybody in the corridor knows it. 4 of the 20 at that table are his own crew, off shift, eating. Terrell Syke is one of them and he has his back half turned. Rule says it in front of them on purpose. 2 of the 4 put their spoons down. The other 2 go on eating. Nobody says a word about it, and everybody in the corridor sees it, and the man it is loudest for is Rule, who does not look at them and does not need to. He does not press it. He is far too good for that. He asks whether I have seen his barge and answers that too. Of course I have seen his barge. Everybody who has ever stood at the waterline has seen his barge. It is a flat gray hull 60 feet long with 2 drum pumps on the deck and a boom crane forward, and it sits at the waterline with its lamps on all night, and it can strip the water off a whole level in about a week, where I do it in a year with a hand truck and 2 mended pumps and my own back. And I have been looking at it across the black for 4 months the way a boy looks at a woman on a landing he is never going to speak to, and if I had it I would have Sump 3 and Sump 4 dry before winter, and there would be no more counting whose dinner a bulkhead costs. 6,000 chits, Noah, he says. That is the number, and he says it pleasantly, and he means it, and it is a real offer at a real price. A sorter makes 4 chits a day. Ort starts the sum out loud at the table because he cannot help himself. 4 into 6,000, 1,500 days, and then he stops in the middle of it and says that it is not a number, it is a joke with numbers in it, and goes back to his plate. I do not haggle. I do not tell him I will find it. I do not say one word about saving, and I am not going to, because I am 18, and I trade in vegetables, and that number is never going to be in my hand. What I say is that I will think about it, and Rule says that is what he would say, and smiles, and that is the negotiation. Then Ort tells him about the valve. Rule has turned to go, and Ort steps in beside him with a mug in his hand and says, "There was a valve, and I watch it happen from 10 feet away, and I do not save him." It takes 4 minutes. It is the full version, the one with the bar and the rat and the man called Dens, who leaves after 3 sentences. Rule stands with his cap in his hands and listens to every word of it, because he is a man who eats with his crews and knows exactly what it costs to walk away from somebody in front of people. I use those 4 minutes to get the drums off the third corridor and out of sight, which is the only reason he does not walk past 300 weight of gray vat sludge on a hand truck with a level 64 stamp on the drum. Neither of them knows. Ort thinks he told his valve to an important man who listened. Rule thinks he was polite to a pump hand. It is the most useful 4 minutes anybody gives me all year, and it is an accident. Deb Vance waits until he is up the stair and the crew have gone with him, and then she sits down at the drum and puts both hands flat on it. "Tonight," she says. Hessel had this floor for 11 years. Not the whole of it, the far end past where the stone is, and he grew food under this building while everybody over his head ate paste and never knew. Deb was a maintenance hand on the water stair then, 38 years old, and she carried tools down for him twice a month for 4 of those years. Sona asks who drowned it. Deb says the men who ran the water, and she says their trade rather than their names, and then she says the reason, and the reason is the thing that shuts that table up. It was not cruelty. Nobody hated him. A man who can feed people is a man that other men have to come and deal with, she says, and there were people on this building who did not want a second table in it. That is all. It cost them 1 afternoon and 3 gates. She was on the stair when they opened them. She says the sound, and then she does not say anything else about the sound. Afterwards, when the level was under and everybody had gone, she went down the water stair with her own tools and punched a plate out of scrap and set it on the stone cap over his last beds, and she did it in the dark on her own with the water coming up the steps behind her. And she told nobody. For 30 years, on a floor where she has lived her whole life, beside people who lost brothers in the same week, she has said nothing at all about any of it. Coyle asks her why. She says because they drowned a level to stop one man feeding people, and there was nothing whatever to be gained by handing them a second one. Then she puts packet 3 on the drum. Tamsin Vert got that tin off Hessel's own hand the week before they came for the level, because she was the only person on that landing who would take it, and Deb was standing there when it was given. She says my grandmother never once planted anything in her life. She kept the tin in a cupboard for 30 years and dusted round it and gave it to nobody. And that is what a person will do with a thing like that when the whole city has agreed there is no such job. I would like to say I sat with that. What I do that week is start freezing Sona out, and I do it so quietly that I could tell you I was not doing it. My facts are good, which is what makes it filthy. Rule knowing about me is not a mystery, because I sold 3 roots to Rule's own man with my own hands, and I have never pretended otherwise. Rule was always going to find out. That one is mine. What I cannot make fit is Irma G. 64 is 400 feet above the waterline, and nothing goes up that far on its own, and out of everybody who knows what is down here, exactly one of them goes up to 64 with a bag on her shoulder 4 times a week. So I stopped telling her things first. That was her price, and she named it flatly on a stair in her second week, and I do not withdraw it out loud, because withdrawing it out loud would be a conversation, and a conversation might end with her saying she did not do it. I would rather suspect her than ask her. Suspecting costs nothing today. Asking means she could look at me and say no, and then I would have to decide whether to believe her, and I am not up to that this month. So Deb hears about Sump 3 first, then Coyle. Sona hears things when everybody else does, standing up in a corridor, and she notices inside 4 days, and she does not say anything, and neither do I. And that is how it stays for a month and a half. Error 3 happens on a Thursday night, at the end of 12 hours on the pumps, with my boots full of water and my hands gone stupid, and there is no excuse for it except that I want people to laugh. Somebody at the table asks whether the collector will come round now that there is nothing to collect, and it is a fair question, and everybody looks at me because I am the one who is supposed to have the answers about that man. And I am tired. And I have 4 people looking at me who a month ago would not have looked at me on a landing, and I hear my own mouth do it. He will come, I say. He will come up the ladder on the Thursday, and he will wipe his palms first, because that is what he does, because you cannot just go picking up nothing. You have to be clean for it. Nothing gets in everywhere. 4 people laugh. Coyle actually puts his head on the drum. Even Ann's laughs, and Ann's does not. And I sit there with my boots full of water feeling about 9 feet tall for the second time this year. By the morning it is on the ladders, and it is not my version anymore, because a floor takes a thing like that and files the middle off it. What is going round by the shift bell is 3 words. Wiping for nothing. 400 feet up on level 64, Irma Gay is standing over 3 trays that have died. The first went in 8 days ago, came up, stopped, and went yellow from the tips. The second never came up at all. The third came up strong for 4 days, and then lay over on its side in one night, and she is holding that tray under the light now, and turning it slowly against the lamp. She does not go and ask anybody anything. She takes a pencil and writes what died, and in what order, and on what day, and what was in each tray, and how much water each had, and where in the bay each one stood. Then she pulls the third one apart with her fingers on the bench, down to the roots, and looks at what is left in the bottom of the tray for a long time, and puts that in the book too. Down below, the line is out of my mouth and going up the ladders on 40 different tongues, and Barch Osk has not heard it yet, and his son has not heard it yet, and I am asleep on a crate with my boots on. 3 weeks into the freeze, 2 floors of this building stop eating, and it takes me 12 more days to find out that they were eating in the first place. 12 and 13 are Stair Core 2. I have never been on either of them. They are 4 flights above my own landing, and I could not tell you the name of one person who lives on them, and that is not unusual, because nobody on 9 goes to 13. There is nothing on 13. What has been happening on 13 is that a courier with a bag has been going up there twice a week on her own time with whatever came out of my ground that nobody at my table finished, and she has been doing it since the second corridor went dry. Not as a route. On her own legs, after her shift, out of her own bag, and she has never once mentioned it to me, because the arrangement we had was that she got told things first, and I am the one who stopped keeping it. She stops going the week the freeze starts, and not out of spite. She stops because I have stopped putting the surplus where she can take it, and started giving it to Deb to hand about, and Deb does not know about 13, and neither does anybody else. Ort knows. Ort has helped her load the bag twice. He does not say anything about it to me for 3 weeks, because Ort assumes that everything obvious is already known by everybody, and it has never once occurred to him to be the man with the news. When it does come out, I ask him why he never told me. He says he thought I knew. I ask him what made him think that, and he says because it was happening, and everything that happens down here is something I know about, and he says it with no edge on it at all. Then he says that the bag was heavy and she should have been using the small hand truck, and that he told her so twice, and that is the end of what Ort has to say about a fortnight of children eating paste. Nell Osk is 10, and he is on the stair landing of floor 8. Waiting for his father, holding a small can he has nothing to do with. There are 2 men on that landing who do not know whose son he is. They are talking about the collector, and one of them is telling the other one the joke, and he tells it well, because it is a good joke and it has been round the ladders 40 times now and it has been polished. He does the wipe. That is the whole of the performance. He takes an imaginary rag off his own shoulder and wipes his palms slowly and carefully, and then he very carefully picks up nothing at all, and holds it, and looks after it. The other man laughs so hard he has to put a hand on the rail. Wiping for nothing, he says. The boy stands 4 feet away with a can in his hand, and both of them see him, and neither of them knows. He does not cry there. He waits until they have gone down, and he takes the can back to the rack, and he puts it in its place because there is a place, and then he goes and finds his father in their room. He does not tell him. He answers 2 questions about his day, and then he goes and sits with his back against the wall. Barch Osk works it out off the boy's face inside a minute. He does not ask him what happened. He sits down on the mattress with the rag over his shoulder, and he says nothing for a while, and then he goes out. He comes down my stair on the Friday, and he is not angry. That is what makes it unanswerable. He walks down into a lit corridor with 180 feet of rows in it and 40 people eating at the far end, and he looks at it for a while, and the first thing he does is wipe his palms on the rag. There is nothing in that corridor to take. He does it anyway. Habit is habit. And it is the saddest thing I have ever watched a man do. And I did that to him with a joke on a Thursday when I was tired. Then he tells me about the bag, and he does it kindly. He says he supposes I know who has been carrying food up to 12 and 13 twice a week since the summer. And then he watches my face and finds out that I do not. 9 people on 13. Noah, he says. He knows the number because he ran a water tithe on this stair core for 11 years, and he knows every room in it. 4 of them are children. They have had nothing but paste for a fortnight, and one of them has been ill with it. He enjoys it. He takes his time. He is entitled to every second of it, and we both know why, and I stand there and take all of it with my hands at my sides. And then he does the other thing, which nobody could have predicted, which is that he starts telling me where the packets went, unasked, with the prices, because he is a collector, and a collector keeps the book in his head. Packet 1 went to Coyle for 11 chits, he says. Coyle has never haggled with anybody in his life, and would pay that for a stone if you told him nobody could price it. Packet 2 went up the ladder to a buyer out of the greens for more than the rest of them put together, and he will not say who, because a man does not hand over his buyer. Packet 3 went to Deb Vance for 4, and he is still sour about it because she haggled him down in front of 2 neighbors on her own landing and made a performance of it, and 4 chits is 4 chits, but standing there while a woman of 68 does that to you is a different sort of price. Packet 4 he dropped on the sump stair, and a man came down behind him and walked over it, and never noticed, and it is somewhere under the water to this day, and he is annoyed about it in a way he cannot hide. Packet 5 went to Dawson Rule, who bought it as a joke, and paid the most of anybody, and pinned it up somewhere on that barge of his. 5. He counts them off on his fingers, and he stops at 5, and he does not say anything about a 6th, and it does not occur to me to ask, because 6 is not a number I have ever been given. It is the single most useful conversation anybody has with me all year, and it is delivered to me on purpose by the man I finished, and every word of it is true, and the joke about the rag is still funny, and it is going to stay funny. He goes back up the stair without eating anything, and without being offered anything, which is my fault as well. I go and find Sona on the waterline at the end of her shift, sitting on a bollard with her boots off, and I do the thing where a man walks up and starts a sentence in the middle. She lets me finish it. Then she says that she is not going to tell me it is all right, because it is not all right, and that she is also not going to walk off, because walking off is what a person does when they want the argument to go on for a month. 9 on 13, she says. 4 of them are children. The oldest is a woman called Sarn Ovi, who cannot get down the ladders anymore and has a hand like a claw, and she asked after me by name, and Sona had to tell her I was busy. I say that I thought she was talking to 64, and she says yes, she is. She has been on the 64 run 4 times a week for 7 years, and she says it flat, with her boots hooked on 2 fingers. Then she tells me the rest of it, which is that Irma Gee has offered her a bed and passage up in the greens off the bay list, and that she has not answered. She has not said yes. She has not said no. She says she is telling me now, to my face, because she wants me to have to sit with it, and I would rather she had thrown something. Then she puts her boots on and goes back on shift, because it is the middle of her week, and Route 41 does not care about either of us. Coyle does the talk before they come down, because it is his job now, and because he has decided that anybody arriving on this level has to be told 2 things before they touch anything. He does it standing on a crate, with his ruined hand behind his back and the good one in the air, and he does it in the language of a kitchen, because that is the only language anybody down here has for anything. The long ones with the seam in them are not food, he says. You do not cut them, you do not break them, you do not drop them on a hard floor if you can help it, although dropping is fine, and fire is fine, and water is fine. What is not fine is snapping. Snapping is the whole of it. And if somebody does snap one, he says, you have got about as long as it takes to say 5 numbers, and then he says all 5 of them out loud, slowly, so that everybody hears what that length of time actually sounds like, and nobody laughs at the end of it. Then he tells them the other thing, which is where the plates go when they are finished, and he takes longer over that than he did over the charges, and he has a system, and the system has 3 parts to it, and he explains all 3. 13 comes down on the Sunday. All of them. Sarn Ovi is carried down 4 flights in a chair by 2 men off 8 who have to stop twice on the stairs. 41 at the table. Ort scratches it on the pillar under the 20, and stands there with the nail in his hand looking at the 2 numbers, and then he goes and gets a bit of wire and rules a line between them so you can see it from the stair. It is the biggest thing that has happened since the first bulkhead. There are people eating in that corridor who did not know this level existed a month ago. Coyle has a system now with the plates, and he is proud of it, and he explains it to everybody who comes down. Sarn Ovi eats a red with both hands and then puts her head down and stays like that for a while, and An stands behind her chair with a hand on her shoulder and looks at me over the top of her head, and I have to go and do something with a bucket. A man off 13 called Erez Tan stands in the middle of the corridor, turning round on the spot with his plate in his hand, looking up at the pipework and the strung lamps and the rows going back into the dark, and he says it out loud to nobody, twice. He says somebody built this. Then he says it again with his voice gone, and Deb tells him yes and points at me with her chin, and 20 people look round at once, and I keep walking with the bucket because I do not know what else to do with my face. I cannot enjoy 1 minute of it, and I mean not one. 41 people are eating off my ground, and I am walking up and down the dark end of the corridor, counting the days on the 11th bed, because the arithmetic is the only thing in here that has not got a face on it. Down at the waterline, sometime in that same night, Barch Osk walks out along the mooring and stands looking at the pump barge. Its lamps are on as they always are. There are 2 of the crew on deck welding something, and the sparks go into the black water and go out. He does not call out to them. He does not go aboard. He stands there with the rag on his shoulder for a long time with his hands at his sides, and then he turns round and walks back up the stair he came down, and he goes home to his son. Sump 3 is the biggest thing I have ever done, and I know it while I am doing it, which is not something I get to say about anything else in my life. 4 corridors dry out of a level that is still mostly under at the deep end. 310 feet of rows in them. It feeds the 41 on its own and leaves enough over that Deb has started sending baskets up 2 stair cores, and the beds are on their 4th turn and they come up faster every time. It is also Ort's level. He has pumped 3 since he was 22, and he walks it every night after the lamps go down, up 1 corridor and back down the next, with his hands behind his back like a man in a room full of things he is not allowed to touch. He talks to it a bit. Not as I talk to a row when I think nobody is listening. He tells it what the water used to be doing in each corner, and where the old leak was, and which way the floor falls, and he is telling it to the floor because the floor is the only thing down here that remembers with him. Irma Gay comes down the 2nd time on the 9th of the month, in the same boots, on her own legs again, and she does not walk the rows this time. She comes straight to where I am working and stands at the end of the bed until I straighten up. "How long ago did you start taking the vat waste?" she says. She has the question ready, and she asks it first, before anything at all, and there is something in her voice that is not curiosity in it. I go on working. There is a bed in front of me that wants doing, and a woman off the green standing at the end of it, and I have decided what she is before she has finished the sentence. 41 people are eating off ground I cannot leave. I have had 2 bad weeks on the pumps and a barge across the water at 6,000 chits that I am never going to hold. And standing in front of me is a woman off the greens who walked out of here with 2 drums of my silt and never asked. I tell her to take it up with the greens. She starts again. She gets 4 words in. I say it a 2nd time, louder, in front of Coyle and Deb and 2 people off 13, and I tell her the waste comes out of a pipe into open water and belongs to nobody, and if 64 wants it back, they can come and get it. She stops. She looks at me for a moment like somebody whose hand has just been shut in a door by accident. Then she says 1 sentence, to the room rather than to me, in the flat voice of a woman reading off a tank gauge. The line carries the setting agent at 4 parts in 10,000, she says, and it has carried it since the bays were rebuilt. And nobody at that table knows what a setting agent is. Deb asks Coyle. Coyle says he thinks it is a kind of pump. Ort, who would have known that it was not, is 2 levels down doing his round. Irma stands there 4 or 5 seconds waiting for one person to ask her the next question, and nobody does, and she goes up the stair. 6 weeks is how long it takes from the first drum to the last row, and it started long before she ever came down my stair. It shows first at the far end of the 4th corridor, and it does not look like anything. The leaves go a lighter green. Then they go a green with gray behind it. Then the youngest ones lie over in the night and do not come back up in the morning, and the ones next to them do it 2 days after that. It comes back down the corridor toward the stair at about the speed of a man walking, if the man is in no hurry, and stops now and then, and it does not miss a single bed. There is nothing to fight. That is what I cannot get my hands round. Every problem I have had down here has been water, or weight, or a bulkhead, or a person, and all of those are things you can put a tool against. I put my hands in the silt at the gray end, and it feels exactly the same. It smells the same. It looks the same. I turn it over, and it turns over. I plant into it, and nothing comes up, and I plant into it again, and nothing comes up, and the hoe is a stick with iron on the end of it. I stand a bed in sump 1 next to a bed in sump 3 with the same crop in both and count the days on them side by side, and after 9 days, one of them is food, and the other one is a bed of black mud with 3 dead threads lying on it. That is when I know it is the waste, and I know it in the second week of them, and I still do not go up and ask her. What I do instead is send Coil. I write the question out on a piece of packing paper, and I write it well, because I am not a fool, and the information is good information. What the beds are doing, how long each one took, in what order they went. Then I fold it twice, and give it to a man with one working hand, and send him 400 feet up a service stair to level 64. He is gone 14 hours. He comes back down at 2 in the morning, gray in the face, and says she read the whole of it, standing up, twice, and then folded it, and put it on the bench, and asked him whether Noah Vert had lost the use of his legs. He says she said it without any heat at all. Then she went back to her trays, and he stood there for a while, and then he came home. Deb Vance says she will go herself. She says it at the table with her hands flat on the drum, 68 years old, flights of bad knees, and then 400 feet of service stair. And she says she has been climbing stairs at people her whole life. I tell her no. I say it in front of 20 people, and I say it in the voice I have started using, and I tell her that if anybody is going up to 64 to stand in front of that woman, it is going to be me, and it is going to be when I am ready. She asks me when that is. I tell her when the beds let me. She says the beds are dying, and that is exactly what lets a man go up a stair. And I turn round and go back to work. And behind me she says my grandmother's name and leaves it there. Irma Gay does not answer paper. She answers people, and she has come down 2 flights of 400 feet on her own knees twice to be one, and both times I have handed her back to the greens. The last corridor goes in the 6th week. 310 feet of rows, 4 corridors, the biggest thing I have ever built with my hands, and there is nothing standing in any of it. And there is not going to be. I put a spade into 6 different places up the length of it on the last morning, and it is dead in every one of them. It is finished as the metal beds are finished, except that it is a level and not a bed. And it did not cost me a charge or a bulkhead or a hard decision at a table. I did it with a hand truck for free, twice a week, whistling, pleased with myself the entire time. I tell them at the table, all 41 of them at once, because doing it any other way would be worse. Nobody shouts. That is the thing about a room of people who have grown up on this building. Nobody shouts. Nobody stands up. Nobody asks me whose fault it was. Somebody asks whether sump 1 is all right, and I say sump 1 is all right. And after that, they mostly ask practical questions, and then they finish eating. 11 of them go back up inside the week, and not angrily. They go the way people go, which is one at a time with a reason each, and each reason is true. Erez Tan off 13 is the 4th to go. He stands with his bag on the bottom step and tells me he has a sister on 11, and she has been on her own since the summer, and it is true, and he had a sister on 11 last month as well. He shakes my hand before he goes up, and I would rather he had not, and I take it anyway and thank him for the work. By the Friday, there are 30 at the table. 30. The counter on the pillar goes down for the first time since Ort scratched 4 on it, and I take the nail off him and do it myself, because nobody else is putting that number on the wall. Ort walks the gray rows on the last night, the same as every night, up one corridor and back down the next, with his hands clasped behind him. It takes him longer than usual. Then he comes up to sump 1 and stands at the end of the table until the talking stops. You did this, he says. He says it flat, and in front of everybody, and there is nothing in his voice at all. He says the woman came down twice. She came down 400 feet on her own legs at 58 years of age, and both times I sent her back up in front of people, and the second time she stood in this corridor and said the answer out loud, and not one of us knew enough to ask her what it meant. He says he pumped that floor for 20 years, and it took me 4 months to kill it, and then he stops, because he has said all of it, and nobody defends me. Not Coyle, not Deb, not Ann's, not one of the 30, and I would not want them to, and it is still the longest 10 seconds of my life. Then he says the other thing, in exactly the same voice, with no change in it. His brother is in sump 3. He went in 9 years ago through an open hatch in the dark at the far end that is still underwater now, and he is somewhere in the flooded third of that level, and Ort has known where since it happened. He says he always assumed he would get him out when it drained. He says it the way he says everything, as a fact about a floor, and then he picks up his lamp and goes back down to the pumps, because the pumps still need running whether there is anything growing or not. 400 feet up, on the same night, in Vat Bay 7, Irma Gay is standing in front of the fourth tray with her hands on the bench. The fourth tray is not dead. It went in 22 days ago, and it is 4 inches high and thin and pale, and there are 7 of them in a row of 12. And by anything I would call a crop, it is nothing at all. It is food. It is slow, and it is small, and it will never once make anything with a metal seam in it, and it does not need a class, and it does not need anybody to stand in it. Any 2 hands in 90 levels could run that tray. She stands and looks at it for a long time with the bay quiet around her. Then she says its name out loud, on her own, at 2 in the morning, a word nobody in this building has used in 90 years. She has learned it out of 3 dead trays and 2 stolen drums of my silt, and she has done it without asking me a single question, and she never will. 30 mouths, 1 dead level, and 9-day cycles that only move on the days I have my hands in them, which is the arithmetic of my life now, and has been since the summer. I spend a whole day at the waterline in the middle of that week, and it is the first day since the stamping machine that I do not touch a bed. There is a hauler wreck half out of the water at the far mooring that has been there long enough for people to tie things to it, and it still has its cell in it. A spent cell out of a hauler is 140 chits at the salvage end. Or it is free, if you go and cut it out yourself with a bar and a hacksaw and 12 hours of your one and only life. I have 12 hours. I do not have 140 chits, and I never will, so I lie on my side in a foot of black water under a hull all day and saw at 4 mounting straps. Ort says the number out loud when I come back. 1 day off the beds is 1 day on every row I have got, he says, and there are 12 rows, so that is 12 days of eating moved back by 1, and he says it while helping me get the thing onto the truck. I put it in the dry corridor under a sheet. I do not tell anybody what it is for because I do not know what it is for. It is the biggest dead thing I have ever had my hands on, and it is in my corridor under a sheet, and Coyle asks about it twice, and I say nothing both times. Barch Osk goes down to the mooring again on the Thursday, and this time he does not stand at the end of it looking, and this time he goes aboard. He does not ask for money. Rule offers him a mug, and he takes the mug. He does not tell him where the farm is, because everybody at the waterline knows where the farm is, and has done for 2 months, and a man who brings you news you already have is a man you throw off a deck. What he brings is 1 sentence, and he worked it out on his own, over 4 months, walking a tithe route on 7 to 11 with nothing else to think about. The boy has to be standing in it, he says. He lays it out the way a man lays out a route. 9 days from planting to pulling, and they only count when Noah Vert is on that floor, with his hands in it. He has never left it for a day since the summer. He would not go up to floor 8 for a woman with a sick sister. That is not devotion, he says. That is the shape of the thing. Rule puts his mug down. He does not need to hurt anybody. He does not need to send 4 men down a stair and have them stand in a corridor with 30 people watching them, which is what he has been avoiding since the first day he came down and took his cap off. He needs the ground gone for 9 days. Then Rule looks past Barch at the boy standing at the end of the mooring with a rag over his shoulder, waiting for his father as he has waited for his father since he could walk, and he asks him whether he wants a job. Nell Osk is 10 years old, and he has never been offered work by anybody in his life. He says yes before Rule has finished the sentence. He says it too loudly. He dries his palms on the rag first, because that is what a man does before he takes hold of something. It is a message to carry down to the sluice gallery, and a handle to turn when he gets there, and it pays 4 chits, and he is to do it on the Tuesday at 6. Barch stands 4 feet away and watches his son be given a job by Dawson Rule, and he says nothing at all because his son has just been given a job, and there has not been one thing to be pleased about in that room for 2 months. I am 8 feet under the floor of all that on the morning of it, putting the 4th bed of the new corridor in and telling Coyle for the 2nd time that he has counted it wrong, and the loudest thing on my level is a pump. The gate goes on the Tuesday evening. It is a handle on a wheel in a gallery at the water line, one of 6, and it lets the basin into the sump 2 line, and a boy of 10 with a rag on his shoulder turns it with both hands because it is stiff, and he does not want to be the one who could not do it. He does not know what it does. Nobody told him. It is a handle at the end of a message, and he turned it well, both hands, all the way to the stop, exactly as you would want a boy to do a job. Deb Vance is sitting at the table in the middle of a sentence about her mother when the sound comes up the corridor. She stops, not at the end of the sentence, in the middle of it, with a word half out, and she puts her cup down and turns her head toward the stair and does not move. Anne asks her what it is. She does not answer. She heard that exact sound 30 years ago from the other side of a bulkhead, and she does not finish the sentence, and nobody ever asks her to. 4 inches an hour, 9 feet to go, 30 hours, and Ort has all 3 of those numbers inside 10 minutes because he goes and looks, and he says them at the table in the same voice he uses for everything. Sump 2 is where the food is. 4 corridors of it, 3 months of work, the beds that carry 30 people, and it is going to be under black water by Wednesday afternoon, and there is not one thing any of us can do about it. The bulkhead between 1 and 2 holds. That is Ort's doing, and Ort's 20 years, and he tells me flatly that the only reason anybody eats at all next week is a plate of steel that somebody bolted in before either of us was born. We work the 30 hours. We get 11 crates up the stair, and the lamps, and the good pump, and 200 feet of hose. Coyle carries plates. Anne's carries a woman off 13 who cannot manage the steps. I go back down for Lipa's cup and dig it out with my hands, cup and all, with the water round my knees, and then all of us stand on the sump stair and watch the water come up a corridor we built, and I would like to tell you what that is like, and I am going to get it wrong. It comes up as water comes up. It is not fast, and it is not angry, and it does not care. It goes over the first row, and then the second, and then the third, and the leaves lie down on the surface and turn round in slow circles, and 2 of the lamps we could not get down are still burning under it. For about a minute you can see the whole of Sump 2 lit green and gold through a foot of moving black. Then you cannot. Then it is a corridor of water with some leaves turning on it, and 30 people on a stair, and nobody saying anything at all. Lipa is at the front of them with her cup against her chest, and mud all down her front, and she asks me, in her ordinary voice, whether the ground under it is spoiled or only wet. I tell her only wet. She says right, and nods once, and it is the only useful sentence anybody speaks on that stair for 10 minutes. 2 of Rule's crew are standing on that stair with us. They came down for supper, and they stayed for this, and neither of them goes back to the barge that night, and neither of them says anything about it, and one of them is holding a crate. Ort chooses that minute to explain that a gate is a great deal easier to open than it is to close, and he goes on for some time about it. Once the head is on both sides, you cannot get the wheel back without pumping down, he says, and then he explains what pumping down would take, and how many days in order, twice. He is not being cruel, and he is not being clever. He is a man who has thought of the relevant thing and therefore says the relevant thing, and it runs 2 minutes while 30 people stand with their hands at their sides. Coyle asks him, quite gently, to stop, and he stops. Nell Osk is still on the gallery when the water comes through, because he stayed to see what the handle did. It comes through the wall gap faster than a boy can cross a wet grating, and it takes his feet out from under him and puts him against the rail. Barch is at the gallery door, because he walked down behind him without saying anything, the way he has walked behind that boy his whole life. He goes in up to his chest and gets a hand into the back of the coat. Neither of them says one word about it afterwards. Not that night. And not to anybody. Nell has a wrapped arm and tells everybody who asks that he did it on a rack, and his father lets him say it. That is the evening I pull the sheet off the cell. I do it in front of Sona and Ort and nobody else, on the sump stair, with the water still coming up behind them, and I get the truck down as far as the last dry cross corridor of Sump 2, while there is still ground to stand on. The best bed in that level is the second one in from the cross corridor. It has done 6 crops. It is the bed the long table has eaten out of since the spring, and every person on that stair could tell you what came off it last. That is where the cell goes. I put it in with my own hands, a spent hauler cell the size of a coffin, and I stand on the ground over it to press it down with the water 4 inches up my boots and rising. 9 days, I say. And then I say the rest of it, out loud, in front of both of them, because everybody who eats off my ground has a right to hear the bill before it is run up. A metal bed gives one harvest, and then it is finished forever. And a thing that size does not take a bed, Ort says. And I say no, it does not, and neither of us says the word for what it will take, because we are both looking at 4 corridors of water. Sona has not said one word to me in 6 weeks that was not about work, and she breaks that here, and she breaks it to ask the only question that matters. How are you going to work it? She says. It will be under black water by tomorrow afternoon, and a bed only counts the days you are standing in it. And she says the last of that slowly, because she is the one who has had to watch me not stand anywhere else. I tell her I am going to be standing in it. She looks at the water, and then at me, and works out exactly what that sentence means, and Ort works it out about 4 seconds later, and neither of them argues with me, and the fact that neither of them argues with me is the most frightening thing that happens all week. So there it is. A 9-day clock on the largest thing anybody in this city has ever put in the ground, 30 people eating short rations off the old rows in Sump 1, and all of it lying under black water on a level that Dawson Rule took back by sending a 10-year-old to turn a handle. Day 1 of the 9 is a Wednesday, and the water over the bed is 7 feet and 4 inches, and I go down it on a rope with a lamp tied to my chest and nothing in my head except how long I can hold on to a breath. 9 feet by the second day. You cannot see anything down there. The lamp gives you a ball of brown about the size of a bucket and everything outside that is the same color as the inside of your own eyelids, and the silt comes up off the floor as soon as you move, and then you cannot see the lamp either. What I do is find the bed by touch off the cross-corridor wall and put both hands flat on it and pull a little of it over with my fingers as I would with a hoe on a dry floor, and then go up. That is the job. Down, hands in it, work a stretch of it, up, breathe, down again. 4 goes a day, then 5, then 6 as I get better at it, and Ort stands at the top of the stair with the rope round his forearm and counts my seconds out loud so that he can tell Coyle the number afterwards. He is wrong about the seconds every time. He counts fast when he is worried, and by the 4th day I know from the sound of him whether he thinks it has gone on too long, which is more use to me than the number. On the 5th morning he tells me to stop going down. He says it while tying the rope off without looking at me. You have done 4 days of it, Noah, he says, and the bed either has it or it has not, and a drowned boy has never grown anything. I ask him whether the bed advances if I sit on the stair. He says no. He says he knows it does not. Then he says he would like it on the record that he asked, and I tell him it is on the record, and he takes up the slack, and I go down again. Coyle miscounts the days on the 3rd evening. He says day 4 when it is day 3, and nobody at that table corrects him, and that is how I learn that every single person on this level has been counting privately since the gate went, and none of them wants to be the one who says the number out loud. 30 people, short rations, off the old rows in Sump 1. There is not enough, and everybody knows there is not enough, and Ann's has a system for that too now, and nobody complains where I can hear it, and the not complaining sits on me harder than complaining would. Sarn Ovi says the useful thing about it on the 4th evening, with her plate on her knees. Nobody down here is hungrier than they were on 13, she says. We were hungry up there for nothing at all. This is hungry for 9 days. Coyle tells her that is a much better way of putting it than anything he has managed, and asks her to say it again to the far end of the table, and she does, and it goes round the level by morning with her name attached. Ort will not talk about what he is obviously thinking about. He is thinking about the water going out of Sump 3 when it goes, and about a flooded far end and a hatch, and he says nothing about any of it. And when Deb tries once, he says he is going to check the number 4. Out on the barge they are running a book on me, and I do not know it while it is happening. What is happening is that a crew of men have written the days out on a plate with chalk and put real chits against them, and the bet is which day the boy walks off his bed. The reasoning is good, as far as it goes. Nobody dives a flooded level 9 days running for a crop. You do it twice, you do it 3 times, and then you sit on the stair and admit it is over, and go and eat what is left in Sump 1. Terrell Psych takes day 6. He puts 11 chits on it, which is more than anybody else puts on anything, because he met me once in a corridor and told me I was worth something and has an opinion about me now. On day 6, I go down 4 times before noon, and Psych loses 11 chits to a man called Toby, who took the last day on the plate out of pure spite and has to wait another 5 days to find out he is wrong as well. Sona goes up to 64 in the middle of that week with a delivery on her route, the same as always. She stands in the transfer hall where the air comes down off the roof, and it is the closest she has ever been to weather in her life. Irma Gay is 20 feet away at the intake bench with the bay list on a hook beside her. Sona does not go over. She signs for the delivery and she goes back down the stair, and she is on the waterline by evening with silt on her boots. She does not tell me. She does not tell anybody. She does not make a speech about it, and she never once brings it up again in front of me. And her answer to that offer is that she came back down, and I am under the water while she does it. Day 9 is a Thursday, and the water is not on it. Rule closed that gate himself the night before, because the tank does not empty on its own, and because Rule is a man who takes a thing back when he has finished making a point, and 2 of his crew ran the pumps all night to put Sump 2 on the floor again. So we get it in the open air, which is the only mercy anybody hands out that week. 4 inches of standing water and a level that smells of dead leaves. What comes out of that bed is not a carrot. It is the size of a man. It is the shape of a root the way a hull is the shape of a boat, and it has a skin on it like gray bark with a seam up the side of it that goes from the crown to the tip and is not bark at all, and the crown is as wide as my 2 arms. It takes 4 of us and a length of conduit under it to break it out of the silt, and it comes free with a noise I have never heard the ground make. Coyle sits down in the mud afterwards. Nobody makes a joke about it. Nobody makes a joke about anything all morning. I set the hoe against the wall by the stair and leave it there, and I do not pick it up again that day. What I want out of it is not a weapon. What I want is a hole. Ort and I have gone over it 4 times with a bit of wire on the stone. 6 levels, 1 on top of another, and a floor at the bottom of the 6th. And under that floor is the old river channel that this basin drowned before there was a building standing here. Put a hole in the floor of Sump 6 and the whole tank drains into the channel and stays drained forever, and no gate any man ever turns will hold water in these levels again. Sump 6 is 9 feet under and 6 levels down, and I am not swimming anywhere with that thing in my arms, so we do it with a lift shaft, a cable, and a bar. The dead lift shaft at the cross corridor goes all the way down to 6. The cable off the good pump is 200 feet of steel. We strap the bar across the crown of the root, hang the weight off the bar, and lower it down the shaft. It takes 40 minutes and 3 of us on the drum, and it goes down past every level of my life for the last 5 months. When the cable goes slack, it is on the floor of Sump 6, under the black water, and I am standing at the top of a shaft with 200 feet of steel in my hands and 30 people behind me on the stair. I count out loud when I am frightened. I did it on the 3rd step above a flooded corridor on my first day down here and got to 4 before I put my foot in, and I am about to do it again. And this time, it is not a step. Because the only way to break a thing at the bottom of a shaft is to break it from the top, and the only tool I have is the cable, and the cable is going to part. I haul. Everybody hauls. The bar comes up hard against the crown and holds, and then the whole weight of it comes onto the cable, and we take it up in short pulls with our boots against the wall, and the shaft makes a sound like a long note played badly. It parts at the drum end with a bang that puts Coyle on his back, and I am already counting out loud into a dead shaft on my knees with the cable end burning across both palms. 30 people count with me, and about half of them are wrong the way they always are, and my own voice is the loudest thing in that corridor. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the whole of Meridian moves at once. Nobody sees it. Nothing under the waterline is ever seen, and this is no different. There is no light, no crater, no column of anything going up the outside of the building for a man on floor 40 to point at with a mug in his hand. What there is one movement of the entire structure at the same instant. 90 levels of chrome and cabling and ducting and floor plate, and every soul standing on any of it. And it is not a shake, and it is not a roar. It is one enormous shrug the size of the city, felt in the soles of the feet and in the back teeth, over in less time than it takes to say what it was, and then a silence in which 400,000 tons of building decides not to do anything further about it. Then the water goes. It goes out of Sump 6 first, and it takes the bulkhead stacks with it level by level, and after that, it is the sound of the biggest thing anybody down here has ever heard, going away underneath us for 2 hours. 30 years of standing black water leaves all 6 sumps in under 2 hours and goes out into the old channel and away under the basin, and there is nothing left of it but a floor. I put the nail on the pillar myself. Sumps drained 1 through 6. The line I scratched the night the first bulkhead went is over my head, and there is no water anywhere near it, and there never will be again. Then I do the other counter because I am the one who has to do that one. Sump 2 is sour, and not a bed of it, the whole level, corner to corner. 4 corridors and the cross corridors and the ground under the table itself, and I walk the length of it with a spade in the afternoon and put the blade in a dozen times, and it is dead in every one of them. I stand in the middle of the corridor that fed everybody through the autumn, on the ground that Sarn Ovi ate off, and Wen ate off, and Lipa ate off, and it will not grow so much as a thread for the rest of anybody's life, and I did that on purpose, with my own hands, and I said the price out loud before I did it. 6 levels drained, 4 of them fit to grow anything, 2 is sour and 3 is dead, and I killed both of those, and I can tell you the exact day and the exact reason for each. Ort gets to the other half of it before anybody else and says it wrong twice before he gets it right. There is a hole in the floor of the tank, he says, which means no gate holds, which means nobody can ever do that to us again, not Rule, not anybody, because there is nothing to do it with, and the same second that took Sump 2 off me, took the handle out of his hand. Rule's crew come off the barge that evening and walk down the stair into a drained sump just to stand in it. Terrell Syke is the first one down. He goes past me without a word, out into the middle of Sump 4, which no living person has stood on, and turns round on the spot with his lamp up. Then he comes back and asks whether he can bring the others down. I ask him what he lost on the book. He says 11 chits, and that he would have put more on it if anybody had let him, and that is as close as either of us ever comes to talking about the 3 roots I sold him in the spring. They come down in 1s and 2s all night. 11 men off a barge crew walking about on the bottom of a tank, picking things up off the floor, calling to each other about what a thing used to be, and none of them asks me for anything. Level 90, on the roof, a maintenance hand feels the floor move under him in the wind and puts his hand out to a rail and decides it was the wind. Level 70, in a corridor with actual daylight in it, a woman stops walking and puts her palm flat against the wall and holds it there for a long moment, and then takes it off and goes on. Level 64, in her own bay, Irma Gee is standing over a tray of small pale seedlings when every tank in the bay rings once, together, like somebody hit them all with the same stick. She does not look at the tanks. She looks at the floor, and then she looks at the tray, and she says nothing to anybody. She does not need to say anything to anybody. 90 levels felt it. And this building has spent 30 years ignoring 6 flooded floors that produced nothing, and it does not ignore a thing that moves 90 levels at once. By morning there is a lift coming down. Not soldiers and not a crew, just one tired man in clean boots with a slate under his arm. 6 levels. That is what is under this building now, dry, open, with the water gone out of the bottom of it into a river that has not seen daylight since before there was a city here. 4 of them will grow anything. 2 is sour and 3 is dead, and I did both of those myself, and the other 4 are floor after floor of the only living soil within 60 miles, going back into the dark further than a lamp will throw. And I can work about 1/3 of 1 level in a day. That is the arithmetic, and there is no getting round it. A bed counts the days I am standing in it. I can walk 300 yards of ground and put my hands in it before my back gives out, and after that, the rest of it is just a floor. Ort works it out on the second morning with a bit of wire, because Ort works everything out with a bit of wire. 6 levels, he says, at a third of a level a day is 18 days to touch all of it once, and a bed wants touching every day for 9. So the answer is that I cannot have it. All of that ground drained open, mine in every sense anybody down here would recognize, and the only ground worth anything is the ground I am standing on this afternoon. The counter has finally gone up past me. It went 4 and 20 and 41 and 30, and now it is 6 levels and 30 mouths and 1 pair of hands, and I am the smallest number on that pillar. The water goes out of the far end of Sump 3 on the Sunday, and Ort is down there when it does. He is down there when it goes, and he is down there all night, and he is down there in the morning, and nobody goes to look for him because everybody knows. He comes up at about the 11th hour with his lamp out and his hands black, and he waits at the end of the corridor until I have finished the row, because he would not interrupt a man working. Then he asks me, and he does it badly. He says it flat and in the wrong order, the way he says everything, and he starts with the hatch and the year and the name of the man who was supposed to have closed it, and it takes him a long time to get to it. What he wants is not a weapon. He says that twice. He says he has watched dead things go into this ground and come back up as a thing you can hold in your hand and eat, and he has watched me do it a dozen times, and he would like some part of his brother to come back up. I say no. There is nothing else in me to say, and I do not make a speech about it, and I do not explain the rule to him because he knows the rule as well as I do. Not that Ort, and not ever, and he knows it before I say it. He says all right. He says it the same way he says everything. Then he picks up his lamp and goes back down to the pumps, because the pumps are still his, and nobody in this corridor ever mentions it again, and something in him is different from that hour on. Warden Cale Anselm comes down the water stair on the Tuesday in boots that have never been in water. He is on his own. No crew, no men, nothing on his belt, 1 slate under his arm that he does not look at once in the next hour, because he decided whatever he decided before the lift doors opened. He is tired as men get tired at about 50, in the face and the shoulders. He stops on the last step and looks down the length of Sump 1 with the lamp strung over it and 30 people at a table, and he says good afternoon to the room and means it. Then he makes the only joke he makes anywhere. He says he had to go and look up what a farmer was. He says it took him longer than it should have, and that the entry was 4 lines and 2 of them were wrong. Coyle laughs on his own in a corridor where nobody else does. Anselm looks pleased about it in a small way, and then he gets on with what he came for. He arrests nobody. He does not raise his voice, and he does not ask me my name, because he has it, and he says it once no avert and gets it right. He apologizes, and then he says the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is unanswerable, and it takes about 40 seconds. 6 levels that produce nothing can be ignored for 30 years, he says, and they were, and he has the file for it. 6 levels that produce something cannot be ignored, because everything in this building that produces anything belongs to somebody upstairs, and there is a whole floor of people whose work it is to decide who. He is sorry, he says. What happens to a level like this one is that it gets sealed. Somebody at the table asks when, and the answer he gives is the whole of the man, and he apologizes before he starts it. 6 days, he says, not because that helps anybody. You cannot seal a level with people standing on it, and carrying 400 people out of a stair core costs more than he has ever been given in his life, and he would very much rather they walked out on their own legs. He is sorry. He says it again. He says it to Sarnovi directly when he has to step round her chair, and he says it to Ans when he has to move past her, and to Lipa, and to a man off 8 whose name he does not know, and every single one of those apologies is real, and that is worse than soldiers. While he is still saying it, an argument breaks out at the middle of the table about what to call the long yellow ones, because Bez has brought a basket up from Sump 4 and set it down in front of a warden without thinking about it. Debs says they are parsnips. Ort says they are the yellow ones. Coil says they cannot be the yellow ones because the yellow ones are the little round ones, and Anne says nobody has ever called those the yellow ones in their life. Anselm stands there with his slate under his arm and waits for it to finish, and when it does not finish, he asks quite politely whether he might try one. Deb hands him a parsnip. He eats it standing up in a corridor in front of 30 people, in the boots he came down in, and he is very careful to swallow before he goes on with the sentence about sealing. Deb Vance stands up at the far end of the table. She is 68 years old and she does not raise her voice either. She tells him she was 38 the last time a man came down these stairs in clean boots and said that sentence in this corridor, and that she was standing about 4 feet from where he is standing now. She tells him she remembers that man's name. She says it out loud. Anselm does not react to it in any way at all, and I cannot tell whether that is because he does not know it or because he does. And she tells him she still has the tools she used on the plate afterwards in a box on floor 11, and that she has kept them oiled for 30 years, and that he is welcome to come and look at them any time he likes. He listens to all of it. He writes nothing. He thanks her, and he does not change his mind, because he does not hate anybody, and he never has. He seals levels, and he goes home to whatever he goes home to. Then he goes back up, and 30 people are left sitting at a table on the only ground in Meridian that has ever fed anybody, with 6 days on it. Nobody moves for a while. Then Bez, who came down with Ons in the summer and has said perhaps 40 words since, stands up and says he is going up tonight to get his mother, and everybody assumes he means to get her out. He does not. He means to bring her down. He says he is not carrying a woman of 70 up all those flights in 6 days to stand in a corridor and be sorry, and if this level is getting shut, he would rather she saw it first. Ans tells him it is 4 hours each way, and that his mother has not been down a ladder since the winter. He says he knows exactly what it is. And Sarn Ovi, who was carried down here in a chair, says out loud that she is not going back up, and that they can seal her in with the rose if it comes to that. She is not being brave about it, she is being practical, and Coil writes her down as staying, because Coil writes everything down now. What I do about it is not clever, and everybody at that table can see straight through it before I have finished saying it. What I tell Sona is to bring everybody, not hide, because there is nothing left to hide, since 90 levels felt what we did and a warden came down a stair to talk about it. Not fight, because there is nobody to fight, and the man they sent apologizes to people in chairs. Not bargain, because the only thing I have to bargain with is food, and food is exactly what they are coming about. Bring more mouths down here in 6 days than one tired man can put on a slate. Bring floor 11 and floor 13 and the 8s and the 7s and whoever else will come down a stair on a courier's word. Sona says how many, in the voice she uses for a load. I say all of them, and she looks at me for a long moment without saying anything at all. She has Route 41 and 400 feet of staircores in her head, and she is the only person in 90 levels who could actually do it. And she knows that, and I know it. And neither of us mentions the 6 weeks I spent not telling her things. She says she can get word up 11 cores by tomorrow night. Then she asks the question I have been dreading, which is what she tells them when they ask what is down here. I tell her to say there is food. And Lipa, sitting on the crate by the pillar, with her cup in her lap and her chin on her knees, says the thing that everybody else in that corridor is too polite to say. They will all want feeding, she says. Every single one of them, on the day they come down, and then again the day after that. And there is one of you. Nobody has an answer. Ort does not have one, and Deb does not have one, and Coil looks at the floor, and I stand there with my hands still wet from the row and let a 12-year-old say it, because she is right, and because saying it out loud is the only useful thing anybody can do with it. 400 feet above us, at about that same hour, Cale Anselm walks into Vat Bay 7 on level 64 with his slate under his arm. Irma Gay is at the bench. He apologizes for the interruption, and then he asks her the question he has come to ask, face to face, in the plain words of a man who does not want to be lied to. Can anything below the waterline actually produce food? She has a bench of trays in front of her, Most of them have something small and pale and living standing in them. She has a book with 60 pages of failures in it, and a method that wants no class, no gift, and nobody standing in it. And she has never once asked me a single question to get any of it. She looks at the trays for a while. Then she looks at him and tells him that she will give him his answer in 2 days, and not before. He says that is not what he asked. She says she knows what he asked and that she will answer him in 2 days, and Cale Anselm, who has been doing this job for 30 years, hears something in that and takes it and says thank you, and goes. 6 days on a table full of people. 1 pair of hands for 4 levels, and the only other person in 90 levels who can make anything grow owes a warden an answer in 2. Day 1 of the 6, and by the evening there are 68 people on this level, which is 38 more than were on it at breakfast. I do not know how she does it, and she will not tell me. Sona goes up at first light, and she is back at noon and gone again by 1, and every time she comes down the stair, there are people behind her carrying their own bedding. She does not stand on landings and announce anything. What she does is root work. She knows who talks to whom on 11 stair cores, and she puts 1 sentence into the right dozen mouths, and lets the building carry it, and the building carries it faster than any man with a bell. By the end of day 2, it is 91. By the 3rd morning, it is 104, and Coyle has stopped counting on his fingers and started keeping a list on the back of a crate lid with a nail. What that many people actually look like is nothing anybody plans for. They come down with bedding and cups, and 1 man brings a chair. They stand in the corridor asking where to put things, and there is nobody whose job that is. Half of them have never been below floor 1 in their lives, and they go quiet at the bottom of the stair the way you go quiet in a room where somebody has died, and then somebody puts a plate in their hands and they get over it in about 4 seconds. Elsie Trabe, off 9, who was the first person in this building to see water come out of a wall, arrives on the 2nd evening, looks down the length of sump 1, and says out loud that she thought it would be smaller. Then she asks who is in charge of the washing. By the 3rd day, there is an argument going on down the table about what the round white ones are called that has been running for 7 hours and has taken in about 40 people, and one of Rule's crew has started saying parsnip for absolutely everything on the table as a joke, and it is catching. Wen comes down on the 3rd day and does not go back up. She sits at the end of the drum with her hand flat on her chest, and she tells me the air down here is wet and heavy and that it is the first place in 10 years where she can finish a sentence. Lipa says that is because it is the only floor in the building with anything growing on it, and Wen says it is because it is the only floor in the building with no vat chemical in the risers, and neither of them will give an inch, and both of them are pleased with themselves. 104 people on 4 levels of drained floor, eating off ground that only moves on the days my own hands are in it. Everybody in that corridor can do that sum, and everybody in that corridor is politely not doing it out loud. Dawson Rule comes down on the 3rd morning on his own legs, and the reason he has to come down on his own legs is all of what has happened to him. The gates are scrap. There is a hole in the tank floor now, and no wheel that any man turns anywhere in this building will put water back into these levels. Not this year, not ever. And he knows it because he sent 2 men to look, and they came back and told him. So the man who took a level off me by having a 10-year-old turn a handle has to come and do it this time, with his face showing, in a corridor, in front of 104 people, and he does not flinch from that at all. He walks down in his own time, with his cap in his hand. He brings the barge crew, 11 of them, off shift in their own clothes, and they come down that stair behind him, and about half of them go straight past him to the table, because they know where they are sitting. He is not wrong. That is what I keep having to hold on to while he talks. He was here first. He came down into the black water 30 years ago, and worked in it when this building had written the basin off. And he has fed his crews better than the floors above them ever since, out of his own hand. He asks me whether I know what a barge day costs, Noah, and answers it himself before I can get a word out, as he always does. 4 crew, fuel, and the pumps, he says. And then, this time, nobody laughs at the habit, and he notices that nobody laughs at it, and something goes across his face. Then he says the thing he came to say. He says the ground is his, and it always was, and that he is not asking for the rouse or the food or the boy, only for the floor, on the same terms as the last 30 years, and everything else can go on exactly as it is. And he says it standing in the middle of a corridor with his own crews eating at the long table 40 feet behind him. Terrell Syke is at that table with a full plate in front of him and his elbows on the drum. The two who stood on the stair the night Sump 2 went under are at that table. Half a dozen more of the 11 who came down behind him this morning are at that table, because the food was out and they had walked a long way. Rule waits. He does not raise his voice, and he does not look round at them, because looking round would be asking, and he has too much on him to ask. Nobody moves. 22 men who work for him, and have taken his wages and eaten his food for years, and would tell you to your face that he is the best man on the waterline, sit at somebody else's table with plates in front of them and go on chewing. It goes on for a long time. Nobody in that corridor enjoys it. Deb looks at her hands. Anne's takes a pot off the table and carries it somewhere it did not need to go, just to be walking. Then Syke puts his fork down and does not stand up, and says, to the table rather than to Rule, that he has eaten here about 40 times now. That is the speech against him, all of it. One man saying a number, sitting down into a plate, and not one word of it aimed at anybody. Rule looks at the back of his head for a moment. Then he puts his cap on and goes up the stair, and nobody follows him, and I understand exactly what has happened to him, and I do not feel one thing about it that I would want repeated. He is back in 3 hours, and what he does with those 3 hours is the best thing anybody in this whole business does. We hear the barge before we see it. The drum pumps come up on the water, and the hull comes round the mooring under its own power, with 2 of his own men on the deck, who did not know where they were going when he untied it. He brings it down the waterline and ties it at the bottom of the sump stair. Then he walks up the stair with the keys in his hand and puts them down on the drum between 2 plates. Not sold, he says. That is the first thing he makes sure of. It is not sold, and it is not a gift, and I have not bought it, and I am never going to, and the price of it is not 6,000 chits, and never was. The price is that his crews eat first. Not more than anybody else, and not better than anybody else, only first. Every day, for as long as there is anything to eat on this level, the 11 men off that barge and the 4 on the night crew go up before anybody else. There is no paper for it, and there is not going to be, and he will hear about it if it stops. He says it with his cap under his arm, looking straight at me, and it is the only speech he makes in the whole of this, and he makes it like a man who has won something, because he has. He came down here to keep a floor, he is going up without one, and in between he has bought 22 men a seat at the only table in 90 levels that will ever be worth having, with the last thing he owned, in public, in one afternoon. Syke gets up when he goes past. All of them do, the whole table, without a word passing between them about it, and Rule walks up his own stair through his own standing men, and does not look at one of them. At the top of the stair he stops and tells me there is a paper packet pinned to the bulkhead in the wheelhouse, above the log shelf, and that he bought it off a collector 2 months ago as a joke and paid more for it than anybody. He does not hand it to me, he tells me where it is and lets me go and get it off the wall myself, which is a different thing, and both of us know it is a different thing. It is packet 5, my grandmother's writing, pinned to a bulkhead over a log shelf, on a barge that is tied at the bottom of my own stair, and the pin has been through the top corner of it for 2 months. With that barge, 4 levels can be worked. It can push the last standing water off 5 and 6 inside a week. It has a crane. It has 400 feet of hose, 2 drum pumps, and a deck to work off. Or it walks round it 3 times with his hands behind his back and does not say a word for 4 minutes, which out of Ort is weeping. And it does not solve one single thing, and everybody finds that out the next morning in the worst possible way, which is by watching. I try to walk Sump 4, 300 yards of new ground laid out in the night by Ort with the wire in 20 blocks, and I start at the stair end at first light with the hoe, and I do it properly, block by block, hands in every bed. 104 people watch me do it. They do not mean to. They are up on the cross corridor and along the stair, and they are eating and talking, and their level of talking goes down as the morning goes on, because they can all see how far along the corridor I have got. At noon, I am a third of the corridor along. At dusk, I am still a third of the corridor along, because the beds I did at first light want doing again tomorrow, and the far end of sump 4 has not had a pair of hands on it and is not going to. I come back up that corridor in the dark with my arms shaking, and everybody on that level not looking at me, and Lipa's sentence from 2 nights ago is sitting in the middle of that table where anybody could pick it up. Then Ort says the obvious thing, at the worst possible moment, the way he always does. He says it to nobody, while coiling a hose. What we want, he says, is somebody who does not have to be standing in it. Nobody answers him. Coil tells him to leave it. Ort says he is only saying, and goes on coiling, and the sentence lies there on the floor of that corridor for a full minute, with 104 people around it, and then Deb Vance says Irma Gee out loud and looks at me. Up on the 9th floor that same evening, Barch Osk is sitting in a room with a full water can beside the door that he has no reason at all to have filled, and Nell asleep on the mattress on the other side of it. Somebody knocks. It is Coil, with a plate, and he says who he is through the door, and says it is from the level and that nobody sent him. Barch does not open the door. He sits where he is with his hands on his knees and lets the knocking finish, and after a while the footsteps go away, and the plate stays out in the corridor on the floor beside the can rack. 2 days left on Anselm's 6. 4 levels of the only living ground within 60 miles, 1 pair of hands that has to be standing in every foot of it, and exactly 1 other person in 90 levels who can make anything grow at all, and I have sent her back up my own stair twice. Sona has to go and find me boots, which is where all of this starts. I have not been above floor 1 since the summer, and everything I own has been wet since the summer, and you do not walk into a vat bay on 64 in what I stand up in. So a courier goes and gets a pair of bay boots off somebody who owes her, and I put them on sitting on the bottom step with 104 people not watching me. Every step of that stair costs me a day on every bed I have in the ground. Ort says the number before I go, because he always says the number, and this time he says it, and then he says go on, and turns round and starts doing something to a hose. It is 400 feet up the intake line, and it takes most of the morning, and it is the last 100 of it I want to tell you about, because nobody I know has ever seen it. The service shaft comes out into a transfer hall, where the air goes past you in a direction. It actually moves. It is cold and dry and going somewhere, and it comes down off the roof through a great many decks of ducting, and it has been outside, and there is light in that hall that nobody switched on. It comes down a well from the levels above and lies along the floor in a long pale strip, and it shifts while you are looking at it, because up there the weather is doing something, and what comes down the well is whatever the weather leaves behind. There are people walking about in it who grew up with it and do not glance at it once. I stand in the doorway in borrowed boots with my hands hanging, 18 years old, off floor 9, and I do not look at it either, because I have 400 feet of stair to walk back down, and 1 day of Anselm 6 left after this one, and because if I look at it properly, I am going to have to think about the fact that Sona has never once stood in it. Vat Bay 7 is warm and loud and smells of nothing whatever. Irma Gay is at the far bench with her sleeves rolled and 11 trays in front of her under a lamp, and she sees me come in and she does not stop what she is doing, and she does not say anything at all. She lets me walk the length of that bay. So I say it. How do you do it, I say. Not what do you want. Not what is your price. Not what will it take. Not one of the 4 sentences I have been arranging all the way up that stair. Just the question, in her bay, in borrowed boots, from the only person in 90 levels she could have wanted it from. She has been waiting for that since the day she walked down my stair, and she does not gloat about it for 1 second, and I would think better of myself if she had. What she does instead is answer, and she is terrible at it. She starts in the middle, she goes back and starts again somewhere earlier, and loses that too, and picks up a tray to show me, and puts it down again, without showing me. She uses 4 words I have never heard in my life, and does not notice she has used them. Then she stops in the middle of a sentence, and asks whether I know what she means, and I say no, and she says right, and starts again from further back. It takes an hour and a half. She has kept this building fed for 20 years, and never in all that time has one person come and asked her how anything works, and she is out of practice at being listened to, and it is one of the saddest things I have ever watched. And her want turns out to be about the size of a cup. She would like to see one thing grow before she dies. She says it standing up, wiping her hands, as though she were telling me where the sink was. She does not say whose hands do it. She has never cared whose hands do it. The method is exactly what she says it is, and she does not oversell 1 grain of it. Silt in a tray, thinned with tank grit, so that it holds water without going to mud. Light off a bay lamp, and not much of it. A feed she has worked out across 4 months of things dying. It takes 19 days instead of 9. It is small, and it is pale, and it is food only, and there is not the faintest possibility of a metal seam anywhere in any of it. And nobody has to stand in it. That is the whole of it, and that is the thing that beats me flat. Any 2 hands in 90 levels can run a tray, and 100 people can run 100 trays, and none of them has ever been to a stamping machine that said anything unusual out loud. I say so. She says yes. Neither of us pretends it is anything other than what it is, and neither of us pretends that mine is not better and hers is not bigger, and that is the bargain, and it takes about 4 sentences. Then she reaches under the bench and puts a paper packet down on the wood in front of me. Packet 2. It went up the ladder off a collector to a buyer in the greens, and through 2 more sets of hands after that, and it has been on her bench for 2 months, and she is the only person in this building who knew what it was the moment she saw the writing. She says she has not opened it. She says she was waiting until she had somewhere to put it, and then she goes back to the trays so that neither of us has to do anything about our faces. Then she tells me about the fixative standing up without 1 word of softening, and it takes 4 minutes. It is the setting agent. It goes into the tanks to stop the bloom, and it comes out down the waistline at 4 parts in 10,000, and in living silt it kills all of it in about 6 weeks. She gives me the dates. She gives me the quantities. She tells me which week I could still have stopped. And she says she came down twice. She does not say it as an accusation. She says it as the last fact in the list, in the same voice as the 4 parts in 10,000, and that is worse than shouting, and I stand in a vat bay with a dead level under my boots and take it. Then she puts her coat on and comes back down the stair with me, and she goes straight to sump 3. She walks the gray rows with her hands behind her back, exactly as she did the first time, and then she gets down on her knees at 58 years old and puts both hands into the dead ground up to the wrists. She tells me what it would take. Wash it, she says, over years. Feed it with bone and shell and rot and keep it wet and turn it and put nothing in it and take nothing out of it. And after a long while something might stand up in it. I ask her how long. She says longer than she has got. Then she says, probably longer than I have got, and looks up at me from her knees on a dead floor. Then she stands up and knocks the dead silt off her hands against her coat, and says she is going to start on it in the morning. Cale Anselm comes down on the sump stair that same evening for his answer, and Irma does not go up to him and does not take him aside. She meets him where the stair comes down, in front of about 100 people who have stopped eating, and she says 1 sentence factually, the way she says everything. There is food growing under the waterline of this building, she says, and she has looked, and there is no procedure anywhere in Meridian for a level that does that. That is all of it. It is not a plea, and it is not a defense, and there is nothing in it about me at all. I am standing 40 feet away with a plate in my hand, and I cannot tell from her voice whether that sentence has saved me or finished me, and neither can one other person in that corridor, and Anselm says thank you and writes nothing down and goes back up his stair. Deb Vance comes and finds me afterwards on the crate by the pillar. She says I have been getting my grandmother wrong for 4 months, and she has let me do it because it did not matter until now. Tamsin never said died, Noah, she says. Deb was standing next to her on a landing when she said it, in the year they drowned the level, and what she said was that dirt is everything that ever ate. I sit there with that for a while. Died is a thing a floor full of machinery would say. Ate is a different sentence entirely, and it is about a table, and my grandmother kept a tin in a cupboard for 30 years, and never planted one seed out of it, and hers is the truer sentence. The corridor argues about words that night in front of 104 people, and it is the best hour anybody has down here all week. Irma has her book out and she is naming things as they come off the barge deck out loud in the old words. Beets, chard, parsnips, and one she has to say twice because nobody in the corridor believes it is a word at all. Floor 9 is having none of it. Coyle says nobody has called them beets since the spring and it is too late now. Ort says the yellow ones are the yellow ones. Anne says that if a thing has been the long ones for 4 months, then it is the long ones. Somebody calls for hands up. Nobody appointed anybody to call for hands up. About 70 people put a hand up for the long ones, and about a dozen put a hand up for parsnip, and one of them is Anselm's slate carrier, who has come back down for his supper. Irma writes it all down in her book. She writes down the wrong names, all of them, in a neat hand, with the right ones in a bracket beside them, and she says nothing about it. And that is the closest thing to a joke anybody gets out of her in 4 months. And then Ort tells the stuck valve business for the 3rd time, and he tells it to Sona, who is sitting on the end of the drum with her boots off, and who was standing 4 feet away the first time he ever told it, in a corridor, with her boots in her hand, on the 8th day of all of this. He does the whole thing. The bar, the rat, Dens, who goes out of it after 3 sentences, the month he gets wrong twice, and corrects himself for both times. It runs the full 4 minutes. She lets him finish every word of it. She does not once say that she was there. When he gets to the end, she asks him whether it stuck open or shut, which is my question, which is the only question anybody has ever asked him. And Ort tells her open, and looks very pleased, and goes off to check the number 4. 1 day left on Anselm's 6. A method that will feed this whole building and needs 100 pairs of hands, and there are about 11 of them, and a sentence already said out loud on a stair in front of 100 people that nobody can take back. Cale Anselm comes down on the morning of the 6th day with 2 men behind him and the slate under his arm, and he apologizes twice on the way down the stair, once to a woman he has to step past and once to nobody in particular. He has come to seal 6 levels. That is what he said he would do, and he is a man who does what he says, and I believe all of it right up until his boots reach the bottom step. There is no barricade. There is nobody standing across anything with a bar. What there is a drained level with lamps strung end to end, a pump barge tied up at the foot of the stair with 2 of Rule's crew washing down the deck, and a table running away down the middle of the corridor into the dark. Irma Gay has her trays out along the cross corridor, row after row of them, pale and small and 19 days off anything, on planks laid over crates. There are about 40 people working up and down those rows who have been at it for 2 days and have already worked out how to do it better than she showed them. Rule's crews are at the near end. Floor 13 is in the middle. Coyle is going up the table with a stack of plates against his chest, using the ruined hand as a shelf, because he worked out how to do that months ago and does not think about it. And I say the honest thing before anybody can catch me at it, because if I let a man in clean boots discover it for himself, it becomes a weapon. And if I say it first, it is just a fact. There is not nearly enough food. 411 people have come down that stair in 6 days, and 1 pair of hands cannot feed 411 people, and there is no version of this afternoon in which it can. What is on that table is 1/3 of a portion each, and it took all 4 levels and everything the barge could reach to put even that much there. Nobody complains, and not one person asks for more. Nobody was promised a meal, and everybody knows exactly what they were asked for, because Sona put the same sentence into every stair core she runs, and the sentence was come down and be counted. And most of them are chewing something that grew, for the first time in their lives, at 40 and 50 and 70 years of age. And 1/3 of a portion of that is still the best thing that has ever been in their mouths, and they are taking their time over it. Anselm stands on the bottom step and reads his sentence out, and he does it properly. He gets his voice up so the far end can hear him, and he reads all of it. The level numbers and the words about sealing and the words about what happens to anybody who is found on a sealed level afterwards. And there is nobody to read it to, not because they are defiant, because they are eating. 411 people go on eating quietly through all of it, and about a third of them do not stop chewing to look up, and the two men he brought with him stand there holding nothing. Then his own arithmetic comes back for him, and he is the one who says it out loud, which is the measure of the man. You cannot seal a level with people standing on it. Carrying 411 people out of a stair core costs more than he has ever been given in his life, and he told us that himself 6 days ago in this corridor, and he did it honestly, and every person here heard him. And there is the other thing, the one that Ermagi put in front of him on a stair 2 evenings ago in one flat sentence. There is no procedure for a level below the waterline that produces food, and nothing in 90 levels covers it. Nobody has ever had to write it. Cale Anselm has spent 30 years learning what happens to a thing with no procedure attached to it, and what happens is that it gets left alone, and left alone for a long time, and eventually somebody upstairs invents a word for it, and then it is somebody else's job. He apologizes. He does that first before anything, out of habit, and this time nobody can work out what for. Then he puts the slate face down on the table between two plates and takes his hands off it. That is the most decisive thing that man does in his whole life. It takes about a second and a half, and nobody except me and Deb Vance is even looking at him while he does it. Then he asks whether there is a job. He says his knees are going and that he has been trying for a transfer upstairs for 4 years. He has just watched the only thing he was ever sent down to close feed 400 people badly, and he would like to know whether there is anything on this level for a man who is good at nothing except arriving and writing things down. Coyle puts a plate in front of him. Then he pulls a crate out with his foot so that it is obvious the crate is for sitting on, because Coyle learned that at this table from a boy who learned it from a girl of 12. The shaft is not cut, I want that said plainly, because it is already going round this corridor the wrong way, and by tonight 4 people have told me about the shaft I cut. Nobody cuts a shaft down from the greens. There has been a straight pipe from level 64 to the waterline since the bays were built, 400 feet of it, and it is the vat intake, and it is the road Irma Gee walked down on her own legs the first day she ever came to see me. Rules crews open the bottom of it out with the barge gear because there is nothing else for them to do, and because Psych asks whether they can. It takes them 2 days, and it makes a hole in a ceiling you could drive a truck through. And Irma takes the cap off the top on 64 at about the 10th hour of the morning, on her own, with a spanner. And the light comes down. It comes down 400 feet through a pipe into a corridor that has been under black water for 30 years. It lands on the floor in a white column about the width of a doorway, with the dust turning over and over inside it. And it moves while you watch it, because up there, the weather is doing something. It is the first daylight to reach the bottom of this building since there has been a building here at all. 400 people stop what they are doing. Nobody says anything. Somebody down the corridor starts to, and somebody else tells them to be quiet. And after that, it is the quietest that corridor has ever been with people standing in it. It holds like that for a long while, and the light goes on moving slowly across the floor. Then they start walking into it, one at a time, without anybody asking them to, the way you go up to a thing at a funeral, standing in it a moment, and then coming out. Behind me, a woman off floor 13 says that it is warm, and says it twice, and nobody answers her. And Deb Vance goes in last, at 68 years old on her bad knees, and stands in the middle of it, and does not say one single word. Barch Osk is at the far end of the table eating, and nobody made a thing of it. He came down on the 4th day with the rest of the 9th floor, because Nell wanted to come and he was not going to let the boy come on his own. Somebody set a plate down in front of him and pulled a crate out with their foot, and that was the whole of the ceremony. Halfway through the afternoon, somebody puts a clean rag down on the table beside his hand. folded. Nobody says who put it there and nobody explains it, and 4 people at that end laugh. Barch looks at it for a moment, then he picks it up and puts it over his shoulder, and he laughs as well, and it is the first funny thing anybody has got out of that man in 5 months. Nell has a job, an actual one, off Ort, on the pumps, with a list of things to check and a day of the week to check them on, and he has been on the number 4 for a fortnight, and has started explaining it to people who did not ask. And in the last hour of that day, Barch comes up the length of the table with the tin in his hand, and puts it down in front of me. Empty, dented, with my grandmother's name still scratched on the underside where she put it. Then he unbuttons his shirt pocket and takes out a paper packet that has been buttoned into it since the evening the machine handed me a hoe, and he puts that down beside the tin. He does not say anything about it, he does not explain, and he does not apologize, and he does not tell me why he kept it, and I do not ask him, and neither of us ever says a word about it again to anybody. Packet 4 turns up 2 days after the water goes, on the sump stair under about an inch of silt, where a man walked over it in the dark 5 months ago and never noticed. It is ruined. Anybody can see it is ruined. I open it anyway, and there are 12 seeds in it, and 10 of them have gone to powder, and 2 of them have not, and I plant those 2 in the best square foot of ground in sump 1, and I mark it with a nail, and I count 9 days. Nothing comes up. Not on the 9th day, not on the 11th, not ever, and I go back to that patch 3 times before I stop going back to it. The ground gives you exactly what you put in it. It does not care whose grandmother it belonged to. That is the whole rule, and it has never once bent for me, and I would not want it to. And it is the only time in all of this that I put something in and nothing came out. 411 at the table. I say the number out loud myself, standing up when the lamps go down, because that number has been said out loud every time it moved, including the time it went down. And it is not a meal. Everybody in that corridor knows it is not a meal. It is a promise, because there are 4 levels of the only living soil within 60 miles under this building, with hands on them at last. 11 rows of trays that need nobody standing in them, and every single person down here has learned to count to 9. Lipa's cup is in the middle of the table, where the light comes down, still cracked, still hers, with about 7 leaves on it now after 5 months of a girl carrying mud up and down a stair. Ort dug it up whole for the afternoon, and it goes back into the ground tonight, and everybody knows that. It is the one thing on that table nobody is allowed to touch, and 411 people have to lean round it to pass a plate, and not one of them moves it. I put the last packet back into the tin. All 6 of them are in there now, in a dented tin on a table, and the paper is soft where 5 different people have had it in their pockets. Then I put the lid on, and I set it down in the middle of the table, next to a cracked cup with a plant in it, where anybody at all can reach it.
Look at what Noah Vert was handed. A hoe out of a drawer nobody had opened in 30 years, and 1 sentence about dirt he had wrong for 4 months. Everything after that he chose out loud, in front of the people it cost. He was never beaten by a man in his way. He was beaten by a woman he would not have a conversation with. It cost him a whole level. And the hardest thing he ever said was a question. Feed people and they come. Say the price before you spend it and they stay. And whatever goes under the ground is what comes back up out of it, which is worth remembering when you choose what to bury.